There we go. Okay. This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Monday, March 24th, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann, broadcasting live from Orlando, sunny Orlando, Florida, in advance of the Prophecy in the News Conference. I want to apologize for the echo in the background. We brought some equipment down with us and broadcasting live here on location from Orlando in advance of the Prophecy in the News Conference taking place on Friday through Sunday. And I apologize for the dead air here. I'm operating off of different switches. Joe is taking the night off, and we will be dark for the rest of the week. We're going to be playing the best of the Hagmann and the Hagmann Report, bringing you some very special guests. And then next week we've got a lot of special treats for you as we return live. For the new listeners, we have many. Of course, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, and our home base is HomelineSecurityUS.com. Now, tonight, folks, we have a very important, very special program for you. Joining us tonight, I guess that's folks, and I'm speaking to the men in the audience, a 2-day drive down across the country with wives and others. You know how it goes, right? We got in extremely late last night or early this morning, and have been running ever since. So you'll have to forgive me. Now, that said, I want to welcome V, of course, the guerrilla economist, and Steve Quayle. Let me push the right buttons here to bring them both on. Now that there we go. All right. Flying solo, gentlemen. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Welcome to everyone, and I'm glad, Doug, you're in the Prophecy or at the Prophecy in the News Conference. And I think tonight V is going to lay it out for us in such an amazing way of just what to expect now, because this thing is scripted, just like a Hollywood shooting script. And a shooting script is different than a written script in that you have all your camera angles, you have all the images, you know exactly, having storyboarded the film, how each individual image is going to play into the whole moving picture. So I had asked V in an earlier conversation, a 1-minute conversation, if he'd just go straight into the Ukraine with your permission, Doug, and then when he's done, he'll hand it over to me, and we'll share with people just the true state of the world's economy in light of all the lies, denial. Never in the history of the world has so much absolute untruth and the total presentation of lies been so present, yet still the band plays on, the deck chairs are arranged on the Titanic, and people go and watch the Titanic movie while they're on the Titanic, not realizing all that water filling up around their feet is their sinking ship. So, V, are you on?
V, yes, gentlemen, I am on.
And folks, for those who don't know V, for those who don't know him, of course, V is the guerrilla economist. His website is roguemoney.net. And, of course, Steve Quayle, you got to be living under a rock not to know Steve. His website is stevequayle.com. Bookmark both sites and visit them often. V, I didn't mean to cut in your time. Take it away, sir.
Hey, no problem, gentlemen. First and foremost, it's great to be on with all of you tonight. And, today we're going to go through a narrative, so to speak, and we're going to look at a bird's eye view of the chessboard that's being arrayed in front of all of us. And it's very important that we recognize what's happening and what's transpiring in this world, especially with the geopolitical moves away from the dollar. Oftentimes I said that we are in the midst of seeing the death of the petrodollar, and if you folks haven't had an opportunity to do so, I recommend listening to the last interview that me and Steve did on the Hagmann broadcast about a month ago, where we covered the dead and dying bankers and how those quote-unquote suicided bankers have a lot to do with what's going on as well with this movement in Ukraine. Folks, what we're seeing right now is, it's pretty interesting. I was actually on the phone with W earlier today, and we're kind of batting ideas back and forth and bouncing ideas and just collaborating. We're trying to get an idea from his sources, from my sources, to see and plan out and project what the battlefield, and economically speaking, is going to look like in the next 5, 10, 20 years. And what we're seeing emerging, folks, is something that's very, very important that you guys have got to recognize. We are in the death throes, and those are his words, not mine, and it's so aptly put. The analogy, folks, if you want to put it this way, you have a patient who's dying, and sometimes when the patient's dying, you have a lot of spastic movements that all of a sudden just, an arm was flying this way, a leg flying that way, and it will hurt and hinder anything and everyone around it. That's what we're facing economically, and that's where the United States is. And what I mean by that is this. There's another adage that kind of fits this whole thing perfectly, and that adage is desperate people do stupid things. And, folks, let me tell you about this whole Ukraine thing, okay? Russia anticipated a move by the Western powers on Ukraine probably in the mid to late 90s, okay? Because going into the new millennium, we've seen a lot of the color revolutions, so to speak, all throughout Eastern Europe. We've seen it in Georgia when Saakashvili got elected. We've seen it in Latvia. We've seen it in Estonia and Romania. All these color revolutions where you had these bankster-backed puppets using and working through NGOs with U.S. funds and money and covert operations sent in there to overthrow, subvert, and cause dissent within the population. And, of course, once their puppet has been installed and once the regime has changed, all of a sudden the people begin to witness a massive pilfering, a pillaging of their property, of their wealth, of their nation's resources, their individual freedoms and rights, and that you see that all of a sudden a nation becomes subverted from the potential and hope of being prosperous into a wasteland that is completely destitute with warring factions. And this is not a new playbook. This playbook has been done multiple times. It's been done by the Romans. It's been done by the British. The Americans, we've been doing it very effectively for a long time as well until recently. Folks, the saying goes, you shall reap what you sow. And we are reaping the absolute embarrassment of all of our tactics of subversion blowing up in our face, okay? We went into Ukraine and we tried to overthrow a democratically elected government where in a nation you have a good majority are pro-Russian. You have a nation that has strong cultural and linguistic ties to the Russians, okay? There is a connection that the Russians and the Ukrainians share. That's through St. Cyril, where you get the Cyrillic alphabet, which is a common language and origin language for both the Ukrainians and the Russians. So we're talking about if you can imagine, the Russians and the Ukrainians are kind of like the Americans and the British, cousins, okay? So it's into this situation, and Ukraine is strategically important, folks, and I'm going to get into that as well. It's into this situation that the U.S. implants itself, because what we've been following, folks, since the end of the Soviet Union in 1990, in 89 and 90, we've been following a policy of encirclement. We've been following a policy of containment. And right now, the bear's gotten so strong, the bear has woken up thanks to, no less in part of Vladimir Putin. Now the bears, we rattle the bear's cage. And this time we're being outplayed multiple levels on every single front. They've outspent us. They've, out-strategized us. And they have the boldness and leadership in order to cement themselves in the position of power where they are today. Now, Ukraine, all right, was one time a breadbasket for Russia. It was given, and Crimea was always part of Russia until about, I think, the 60s, when Khrushchev, the Soviet premier at that time, gave Crimea back as a gift to the Ukrainians. And, Khrushchev was Ukrainian himself. So that's the close history between Crimea and Ukraine and Russia. And we all know, following the news, that, Russia has the Black Sea Fleet is stationed right in Crimea and Sevastopol, their naval base right there. And so we know that's a very, very strategically important point for the Russians It's one of two of warm water ports they have. The other warm water port, folks, and again, there's a connection here. That's Tartus in Syria. So those two ports are the warm water ports that the Russian Navy uses. So very well that Putin is not, just like he stood firm in Syria, he is not going to allow the U.S. and its Western-backed allies to take Ukraine, specifically Crimea, from him. He's not going to risk that, okay? So the thing tonight that we're going to go into, folks, with all this information, there's a lot that we got to go through tonight. I got pages and pages of information that I'm hopefully going to get through every single one of them. That's the goal. The point is that we want to make tonight is that Ukraine is a place where the dollar goes to die. And what do I mean by that? Again, folks, if you remember back in October, back in September, I talked about the botched false flag event that the Free Syrian Army, these rebels who are a bunch of jihadis from Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East and the Muslim world, what they try to do and blame and peg on Assad and how that blew up in their face. And I told you implicitly that botched false flag event, and then the Russians coming down and the Chinese throwing a very hard line on Syria, saying this far and no further, which caused the U.S. to pack it in. That event had a lot of reverberations on so many different levels. Now, without touching base on all of them, one of the things I want to pinpoint and focus on is the effect that event had on the dollar's supremacy as the world reserve currency. For the first time in a long time, countries who were unsure, countries who were, let's say, in the emerging market, who were at the bondage of the dollar, that did not know what to do because they had to deal with the shackles of the dollar, all of a sudden saw that if they cozy up to the Russians and the Chinese, they no longer have to use the dollar, but that the Chinese and the Russians will protect them, and it will ensure the integrity and the protection of their natural resources. So that's the big thing that happened. It was a reverberation that for the first time, the United States kind of lost its prestige. We lost a little bit. Our image was tarnished. There was a kink in our armor. And that now our enemies realize that we're weak economically because, let's be honest here, we all know the weapon, the sword of Damocles that was hung over our head that caused us to retreat. And folks, this time again, it's very important that you realize that no matter what happens in the Ukraine, we have stepped in it so bad that no matter what the outcome is, and I don't think it's going to be a conflict, okay, and I'll get into why I firmly believe there won't be no military intervention there. But the fact is that we're going to be stepping away from that, away from the Ukraine. And our mere fact of stepping away from the Ukraine, folks, is going to cause the final paradigm shift. And that's what we're going to focus on. The paradigm shift that will occur with the U.S. failure in the Ukraine is not something that's going to be indicative or can be measured by what a stock index like the Dow does or the S&P or the NASDAQ, but it will be something that will be sensed in the body politic of the global community. It would be something that will be sensed within the global economy as the U.S. will lose its last and final prestige. And those nations which sat on the fence for so long, wondering, should we jump this dollar ship? Should we get on board with the massive, huge trade zones and trade unions that are forming throughout the globe? This paradigm shift is going to cause those nations to finally get off the fence. They're going to finally wash their hands and the dust from the U.S., and they will firmly run into the embrace of the Russians and the Chinese. And that's where we're going to kind of go tonight, folks. Steve.
I think the best word right now, it's an interesting word, it's revanchist, and we're seeing Russia basically going after their, if you will, their old territorial claims. But I think the other thing that we've got to keep in mind is if you've watched the headlines, ladies and gentlemen, over even the last 72 hours, where Vladimir Putin is being projected as the protector of Western Christianity, at the same time the current administration and all those and even the military are being seen to the world as being diametrically opposed to Christianity. This all has obviously very prophetic significance and relevance. It's interesting to me that as V details out the situation in the Ukraine, especially the relationship of the money, I want to give you the famous statement in history that Rothschild made when he said, "Give me control of a nation's money and I care not who writes its laws." Well, the point is that big bucks are moving behind the scenes. And whether we like to admit it or not, major corporations, whether it's a Russian energy conglomerate or it's the biggest oil companies in the world, Exxon and others, they all have their place in, I would say, the prophetic checkerboard or chessboard that V started out the program with. The problem is right now is that America is being held in contempt. That contempt means to be, there's no way to really understand it except you could use disgust, revulsion, the entire presentation of what used to be Pax Americana, which would be more, I don't know what the Latin word for plunder is, but plunder Americana. We are now reaping what we've sown. And again, it's critical for people to understand this, that the entire Eastern European breakaway nations that were of the former Soviet Union or under their sphere are now terrified to death because they saw what has happened in the Ukraine. And I'm kind of with V at this point. No one can challenge the Russians in a non-nuclear environment, man for man. NATO, you want to know what NATO is? NATO is right now going to be probably, in my opinion, the top generals of NATO are probably being bought off behind the scenes. And someone says, what do you mean by that? If you remember Saddam Hussein's generals during the Gulf War, we, the United States, bought off a lot of his major military movers and shakers. In essence, we gave them so much money that they didn't even have to worry about it anymore, and most of them either fled to Switzerland or other countries around the world with, multi-million and tens of $1 million. So when I'm seeing the Ukrainians go over, and obviously, as V pointed out, a lot of the, especially Crimeans, are Russian by ethnic origin or by choice. The point being is that NATO is now faced with a challenge that they cannot deal with in lieu of the pathetic leadership of the West. I think, V, what's incredible to me is the completely obvious transparency of the taking down and taking part of the U.S. military, first on moral grounds, and obviously we all know don't ask, don't tell has turned into what one author said, flaunt it and be proud of it. But not only that, the battle lines now are being drawn in all realms, in the financial realm, in the physical realm, and in the spiritual realm. It's almost like the command that Joshua gave to the children of Israel, choose ye this day who you're going to follow. And that's what it's going to come down to all of us. And here's what it comes down to in the economic front. There's so many voices out there, and yet day after day, week after week, month after month, V and I get the same questions from different people. Well, what about my future? What about my 401k, IRA? We've heard about all of the things that have gone on, ladies and gentlemen, and watched them in real time, where bank deposits were taken by the banks, and basically people went to bet on Friday, and by Monday morning they were wiped out or pretty close to it. It's the realignment of nations, and 70% of the world's most prominent and prosperous economies are saying no to the dollar. Now go back to Kyle Bass's interview with one of the financial advisors to Barack Obama, and and I use the name on purpose, and you see that they're going to kill the dollar. The whole idea is this, and this is V, and I'm going to turn it right back over to you to get people to understand. If the foundations be destroyed, the righteous can do nothing. And while the West sits basically licking ice cream cones, riding bicycles with those little caps on, the world looks at the West as being weak. Japan will be suing behind the scenes for peace. There's a whole lot of double crossing going on, a whole lot of triple crossing going on, and a whole lot of quadruple crossing going on. And what's going to happen? America is going to be isolated unto judgment. Now, I've said that for 20 years. You can understand, V and Doug, a lot of people didn't like to hear that. And I'm going to even go into further detail tonight after V's laid it out, what I see coming, because what I see coming now is so tragic that it's hard for the average American to wrap their mind around it. So, V, I think it's important that people understand that Vladimir Putin, KGB colonel, obviously spy master, obviously, and most of you probably never could forget if you ever saw it in the first place, that when Ronald Reagan was getting into his limousine, you had a picture of Vladimir Putin, pretty stout and pretty buff, right next to him, within feet of him. I think that was the first selfie for people to understand. That was their way of saying, look at how close we can get to your leaders. And hopefully later on in the show, Doug, we'll talk about even some of the talk radio show hosts that you and I specifically have tried to warn. This is all relevant, ladies and gentlemen, to warn of actual plots and schemes against them, only to have people close to them that happen to be very evil and wicked men try and undermine you and I in our warnings to them. We'll talk about that. But betrayal is the order of the day, and now Poland, the entire Eastern Bloc nations are panicked. Poland can call up 7,000 reservists, but that's nothing. And as most people who know the lay of the land of Poland knows what a blitzkrieg means from history. So basically, all of our promises, all of our former help, they're dismissing it right and left. So people are making deals. I'm talking countries are making deals, and I believe even Russia offered to divide up the Ukraine to Poland and some of the other countries if they just come on board. Did you see that, V?
No, I didn't get a chance to see that.
Well, so I'm going to turn it back over to you now, because don't you believe the great disconnect is that daily we become isolated, we become exposed. I'm talking United States. The lack of leadership, the lack of military leadership, the ability to respond. I believe this, and I think I've read a prophecy on the air a couple of months ago on Doug's program, but enemies from within and without. It's a full court press, and we're ready to be toasted. And so the Dow Jones Industrial Average, understand, ladies and gentlemen, that's nothing more than a hypnotist pendulum. That's all it is. It's nothing more than a hypnotist pendulum. The manipulation of gold and silver, we'll get to that, is nothing more than the transfer of wealth from the West to the East by using all of the crooked machinations of trading and of offsetting credit and balance accounts. And basically what it boils down to is this. The money from the West is going all to the East. The Chinese will back the gold yuan or the gold renminbi, and with Russia trading their oil and natural gas, and I say this, V, I think Vladimir Putin can put the end to the West financial system in 1 hour and I don't know how many keystrokes, but they're about ready to do it. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. So this is the way it's transpired. And just to give you guys a geostrategic understanding of what's going on. When I said earlier that the Russians have been anticipating a Western move against the Ukraine, it's because, we in the Eastern blocs, they were anticipating it. And not only were they anticipating, they're ready for it. Now, the question is, why the heck are we in Ukraine? Well, simple. Number one, it's the strategy and the doctrine of containment that we've been running on the Russians for the last 20 years or so. Number two, it's to get the shale oil that's in Ukraine. Ukraine has a little bit of shale gas that's in these specific areas in Ukraine, specifically the Dnipropetrovsk region and the Donetsk province. Those are where the eastern shale gas lies. Okay. Now, one thing you got to know about shale, and anybody living in Pennsylvania with the Marcellus shale over there knows about hydrofracking. Okay, we know about the environmental disaster that hydrofracking does. I talked to a prominent oil executive who's actually has his oil company. It's probably one of the biggest ones operating right now in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania. And the gentleman flat out looked me in the eye and said, well, fracking is safe. All the chemicals that we use to pump into the water table, it's the same chemicals that you would have underneath your kitchen sink. I looked the man dead in the eye and said, will you drink what's underneath your kitchen sink? And at which point he abruptly stopped. But the point that I bring up is this. It's been an environmental disaster, and it doesn't cause that big of an impact into a nation's energy needs. It's just a drop in the bucket. It's not enough, okay? But that's not going to stop a whole bunch of idiots from going into the Ukraine and try to control their shale gas. The other thing also is the thing with Ukraine is that they feel that they can go ahead and control the pipeline flows of natural gas from Russia into the hot European markets. Because, like I said back in October, Europe is the actual prize that they want. Europe is the prize. And so they will do anything they can to control the pipeline, the energy flow, get the shale gas, contain Russia. These are all the strategies that are permeating. All of these are strategies of an idiot. Just like they try to control the pipelines and the pipeline deals that are being set up in Syria, and they failed miserably in that, they're failing in this as well, folks. And what I mean by that is this. Just because you can control the valves on a pipeline does not mean you control the source. It is the equivalent of you owning your home, and you don't pay your water bill for a few months, and all of a sudden the utility company, which is the source, comes down and shuts off your water. Now, you can control the faucets all you want, but you don't have control of the source. And that's what these idiots are failing to understand. That's how drunk and hubris they are. And this is my point of desperate people doing stupid things. Secondly, the shale gas. Who do they put in charge of the shale gas program? Well, they put two guys in charge, Igor Kolonomsky and the other gentleman by the name of Serhiy Tartua, both of whom are a bunch of neo-Nazi thugs, and both of whom are dual citizenships. They're Ukrainian and Israeli, okay? So there's a lot of intelligence operations going on, a lot of double-crossing going on, like what Steve mentioned, okay? So when you look at the Ukraine, right, a failed, botched attempt. You have neo-Nazis controlling the majority of the power structure that's coming into play. And, of course, you have the oligarchs and the Western-backed puppets. Putin, what he did was masterful. The man took out the entire eastern half of Ukraine, Crimea, and he annexed it without a single shot being fired, without any sort of bloodshed. And that right there is a marvel, folks. Russians were paying $90 million a year to lease out that naval base. Now, that naval base no longer has to be paid. It's theirs, totally and entirely. The other thing that's beautiful is what the West missed, is that there's great natural gas deposits right in the Black Sea and Crimea. So the annexation of Crimea was a very, very strategic move energy-wise as well. It means that not only does Putin have a navy there to protect those energy rights, but he has all the drilling rights off the coast of Crimea. A very, very powerful move indeed. So now what is the West going to do? Well, they got their hands tied. Folks, I will tell you right now, Ukraine, you could already write it off as a failure. We cannot field any troops. Logistically, it will take us at least till July, maybe even August to get any sort of sizable number there. And number two, the Russians there, folks, that's their home turf. You don't win wars against a well-equipped military in their own home turf. It's a suicide mission. So that military option, folks, is off the table. So what's left for the West? Oh, you hear the talk. You hear the bellicose language coming out of John Kerry, the Mr. Ketchup Man. And what does the Ketchup Man do? Well, the swift boat Ketchup Man says that they're going to go ahead with sanctions against Russia and ban them from the G7 and the G8. Who cares? The G8, folks, for those that don't know, the group of 8 is the most, the G7, and the G8 is the 8th as being Russia, but the G7 itself is the most broke, insolvent club of losers on the planet. You want to talk about a group of countries and nations who have the most broken down, run down economies? All you have to do is look at the G7, headed by the U.S., headed by the British, the French, headed by even the Germans. You want to talk about insolvency? There you go, folks. And they're gonna, and there's idle threats of, oh yeah, we're gonna ban you from the G8 and the G7. Who cares? The real power, folks, is the G20. That's where the real power is. And I don't know if any of you guys heard what the Chinese delegation did at the G20 meeting in Australia. One of the heads of Chinese banking, he got up there, and he basically told after the U.S. delegation got up and calling the kettle calling the pot black, the U.S. delegation got up and said to the Chinese, oh, you got to fix your credit markets. You got to do something to fix those bubbles that you have. And all of a sudden, the Chinese delegation got up and says, you need to fix your economy. You are living off the printing press. Those are his own words. You are living off the printing press. You do not have an economy based on industry, but on paper. Folks, that was language that was so brazen and loaded that the world heard that. The 20 largest economies in the world heard that. And the U.S. delegation, most of them just walked out. Because what else can they do? What else can a group of losers do? And that's what happened. This thing with the Ukraine, it's over. What's going to happen in Ukraine? I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen in Ukraine and all its eastern neighbors. The biggest thing what they try to do is topple with the emergence of what's called the Eurasian Trade Zone. And the Eurasian Trade Zone, folks, is one of the biggest trade zones. I think it comprises anywhere between 12 or 14 time zones. And the Eurasian Trade Zone is being put together by the Russians, and it's being fashioned and festooned by Vladimir Putin himself. And it's going to comprise trading resources without using the dollar as a medium of exchange. And the U.S., because the most critical thing that we have, the only weapon we have is paper. And the only advantage and the only luxury we have is that our currency is a world reserve currency. This strength, folks, also happens to be our Achilles heel. So the Russians are making a power move, and we're falling into it. The Russians, folks, let me tell you this. This is from inside sources. I firmly believe, and even with my own data is telling me, and my own intelligence is telling me, I firmly believe the Russians, not only were they prepared for a Ukrainian invasion, okay, by the West into Ukraine, but they laid the trap perfectly for them. What do I mean by that is this. During this whole entire social upheaval that was occurring in the Ukraine, all of a sudden, a well-armed, well-funded police force that is pro-Russian suddenly stands down and mysteriously disappears back into the woodwork. All of a sudden, a bunch of unarmed civilians were able to storm the governmental headquarters. They were able to storm the presidential villa long after, of course, the president has been gone. But who gave the stand-down orders to the cops? Who told the pro-Russian cops to stand down? And I believe that a lot of the intel is pointing that Putin allowed this to happen because it would be a gigantic mess. Because he's already secured Crimea. He knew he had Crimea. As soon as this thing started, he knew he was going to take Crimea. He knew he was going to decapitate the whole entire Western move and the dollar in one shot. And this is it. Because of what he's done, and because the West, particularly the U.S., we like to create monsters that we can't control. He knew that we're going to get a whole bunch of neo-Nazis. He knew that the only allies that the U.S. has working in the Ukraine are neo-Nazis, are self-absorbed oligarchs, and a few social idealists. That's it. It is of no threat to the Russians. It is of no threat to the Russians. And so when the UN, the U.S. when the U.S. and NATO came in with their NGOs and the $5 billion that they dumped into this whole entire program, all Vladimir Putin had to do was annex Crimea, which he already had in his back pocket, and then watch the destruction. Because what's going to happen in Western Ukraine is this: it is going to turn into a wasteland in the next 15 to 18 months. It will be a wasteland where neo-Nazi thugs, oligarchs, and U.S. NATO puppets will be vying for the levers of control. It will be just like how Kosovo is. It will be a den of thieves. It will be a deposit for narcotics and narcotics trafficking. It will be a central hub of sex traffickers. It will be a central hub for organized crime. This is what happens when the U.S. goes in, or NATO or the UN goes in to change a regime. A country goes from a second or first world status into a third world hell. And that's what's going to happen. And you better believe as this happens, Estonia, Romania, Latvia, all the countries right now that are having the tentacles of Monsanto and the tentacles of ConocoPhillips and Chevron, all these tentacles of Western-backed corporations and banksters and oil companies coming in, they're going to realize, oh my God, so this is what happens when the West takes over a country, when their pensioners are having their pensions cut in half, when the resources are being stripped, where the price on energy and food explodes, where the people can no longer afford to live in their own country. So this is what happens. And you will see the entire Eastern Bloc, the color even the ones that are the color revolutions of the early millennium, wash their hands of the U.S. and go running into the Eurasian trade zone that Putin is setting up. That is the trap. This is the eagle trap. I wouldn't even call it an eagle trap because we're a turkey now. This is the turkey trap. And Vladimir Putin has turned Ukraine into an economic and political turkey shoot, and we are the target, and we are what's for dinner. Steve.
You know, it used to be said it's tough to soar with eagles when you got to trot with turkeys. And it brings me to some of the visions that Dmitry Duduman had. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. It seems like, I used to say, it seems like a lot of critics out there believe every day is Thanksgiving because they sure do a lot of turkey activity. They act like turkeys, and that's not a compliment. I want to put everybody in remembrance because I think that something that is forgotten, especially in the non-accepting of prophecy evangelical world and even the non-Christian world, seems to put more stock in the prophecies of Nostradamus. If you take the polls that are out there that these are the end times, the understanding of Gog and Magog, the end war, the rise of Antichrist. I saw it today too, V and Doug. I don't know if you guys saw it, but 49% of the Americans polled believe that the United States government is out to kill them. Whoa, what is it? When the government fears the people, you have liberty. When the people fear the government, you have tyranny. But that's an incredible thing. But I want everyone to know that probably one of the most remarkable websites out there, and this is pertinent and to germane, more than you could even imagine what we're talking about tonight. It's handofhelp.com. Again, handofhelp.com. And it's a ministry of Dmitry Duduman, who went to be with the Lord, but now it's Michael Bodea, his grandson. But here's a vision in 1996, and Doug and V, I remember being on the air on talk radio when this one came out and doing a whole show on it. Because at this point, the Russians and Chinese were not buddy-buddy. At this point, there was no strength for Russia to challenge the U.S. in the way that obviously there's no strength in the U.S. now to defeat the Russian challenge. And this is a vision received by Brother Dimitri Dudum on April 22nd, 1996. Now, we're March 24th today, and as I was looking at this, and I prayed before we went on the radio, V and Doug, I said, Lord, just help us to paint the picture that is so clear, so concise, to clear up all misconceptions that people will get it, Lord, because the day will come with whoever controls the Internet. Obviously, these type of shows won't exist, but let me go on. So Dimitri received this vision April 22nd, 1996. And interestingly enough, we're coming up on the 18th year of that. I prayed, he said, and then went to bed. I was still awake when suddenly I heard a trumpet sound. A voice cried out to me, "Stand." In my vision, I was in America. I walked out of my home and began to look for the one who had spoken to me. As I looked, I saw 3 men dressed alike. 2 of the men carried weapons. One of the armed men came to me. "I woke you to show what is to come," he said. "Come with me." I didn't know where I was being taken, but when we reached a certain place, he said, "Stop here." A pair of binoculars was handed to me, and I was told to look through them. "Stand there, don't move, and look," he continued. "You will see what they are saying and what they are preparing for America." As I was looking, I saw a great light. A dark cloud appeared over it. I saw the president of Russia, a short, chubby man who said he was the president of China, and 2 others. The last 2 also said where they were from, but I did not understand. However, I gathered they were part of the Russian-controlled territory. The men stepped out of the cloud. The Russian president began to speak to the Chinese one. "I will give you the land with all the people, but you must free Taiwan of the Americans. Do not fear, we will attack them from behind." A voice said to me, "Watch where the Russians penetrate America." I saw 3 words being written: Alaska, Minnesota, and Florida. Then the man spoke again. "When America goes to war with China, the Russians will strike without warning." The other 2 presidents spoke too. "We too will fight for you." Each had a place already planned as a point of attack. All of them shook hands and hugged. Then they signed a contract. One of them said, "We're sure that Korea and Cuba will be on our side too. Without a doubt, together we can destroy America." The president of Russia began to speak insistently. "Why let ourselves be led by the Americans? Why not rule the world ourselves? They have to be kicked out of Europe too. Then I could do as I please with Europe." What B's talking about in pipelines, oil, we're right there right now. The man standing beside me asked, "This is what you saw. They act as friends and they say they respect the treaties made together. But everything I've shown you is how it really will happen. You must tell them what is being planned against the Americans. Then it will come to pass the people will remember the words the Lord has spoken." "Who are you?" I asked. "I am the protector of America. America's sin has reached God. He will allow this destruction, for he can no longer stand such wickedness. God, however, still has a people that worship him with clean hearts, and they do his work. He has prepared a heavenly army to save these people." As I looked, a great army, well armed and dressed in white, appeared before me. "Do you see that?" the man asked. "This army will go to battle to save my chosen ones. Then the difference between the godly and the ungodly will be evident." Now, why is that critical? 18 years later, we're now seeing the implementation of a dream that God gave a man of God who tried to warn people then. So God is more than long-suffering and more than patient. And why this even becomes more curious to me, there's now a movement on in Alaska that's being, obviously, I would say, funded by Russia to join that the Alaskans, supposedly, not all of them, but there is a movement on to join Russia. If you notice, obviously, that we're hearing reports from all over the country, but a whole lot of them around Michigan and Minnesota of Russian troops, Russian Spetsnaz, etc. Then Florida and the entire East Coast. Now, in the last week, Doug, we've had Russia's top spy tugboat, and it's not like the little tugs you see on the Hudson River, reports of subs. What V was talking about encirclement, you don't have to be blind. The best thing that NATO could have done is backed off, not encircled Russia. Now we've got Russian troops in Cuba, we've got them in Venezuela, we've got their subs off both coasts, we've got an internal force that was brought here by I would say the entity in the White House. I remember when I interviewed Robert Jones and we talked about about the letter that his relative was shown, who was called to Moscow, who was married to a Russian, and where basically Department of Homeland Security had requested the Russian troops to be in America. Now look, here it is. We got to grow up, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you still can't grasp what happened to your country. Some of you still can't grasp how it's laying out and playing out. Some of you don't understand that Mystery Babylon, whether you want to accept it or not, the United States is in prophecy. All of the standard dispensationalist nonsense doesn't apply. America is, or forgive me, has been a superpower. Obviously, there's no other nation in the world that fits the criteria of Mystery Babylon and our merchandise. Money is a commodity, and money changes hands from weak hands to strong arms. That's also said about gold. So what you're seeing is the greatest wealth transfer, and the world runs on energy. That's why people get murdered who have alternative energy devices, because the alternative energy devices, whether it's zero-point energy or cold fusion or any of the other marvelous inventions that are out there, they're blocked. That's why electrogravitics and all of the what I call black science, black meaning the secrecy of the budgets that built them, actually your tax dollars, all of those things exist, but not for your benefit. We're seeing the war being set up that will cull the planet's population. Right now there are outbreaks of Ebola, even in Canada. Guinea is nothing more than a biological test tube for bioweapons designers. This is why you're seeing multiple strains of Ebola. I wrote the book, Breathe No Evil, I think pretty well now, Doug, 15 years ago at least. I would say maybe longer than that, but 15 years at least. And people would not accept then the chemical, biological weapons. Nuclear weapons, you get a flash and a bang and you get residual radiation. When you release a CBW, a chemical biological weapon, whether it's chemical, and by the way, biological, when I say CBW, I'm not saying they're all the same thing. I'm just saying that you can use chemicals to facilitate the dissemination and aerosolization of bioweapons. So when I'm seeing all of these outbreaks, I'm suspicious. When I hear of multiple, strains of Ebola, Marburg, or variations thereof, I know what's going on. Because if you understand the contempt the Illuminati has for the global population, we're talking about 5 to 5.5 billion people that have to be destroyed. It doesn't, I get V, and I don't know if you get them too. Why didn't you guys ever talk about the Bilderbergers or the Committee of 300 or this or that? That's 20-year-old news. We're talking about World War III. We're talking about the end of the United States. We're talking about treason. We're talking about murder. We're talking about invasion. We're talking about the whole issue of the United States being able to exist. And when you've got 70% of the world and you've got the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then you've got everyone else that's now seeing that they're being double-crossed, you're seeing the intentional, and I say this, the intentional rape, pillage, and plunder. Doug, what really was astonishing to me, under the Bush administration, the skull and crossbones, it's amazing. We have the pirate movies, Pirates of the Caribbean, Disney. But what was so funny is all along it was so plain to see. That's why I came up with that little statement. I don't know if you'd call it a rhyme or whatever. Rape, pillage, and plunder. The United States is going under. And it's going under in such a way that you cannot print your way out of this dilemma. The rest of the world is going to turn on the United States. Years ago on your show, Doug, I said the United States will become a hissing, and every day that becomes more and more pronounced. What B is laid out is the total abandonment of not only the United States, but people will run to the biggest umbrella of protection, and that is going to be a variation of Russia or China or both. And the sides are being picked, and the globalists are going to bring about the war, the Third World War, to bring on their man of peace. That's why you're seeing all the concessions from Rome, one world religion. That's why you're seeing all the treachery and the treason within the evangelical church of Chrislam. That's why you're seeing it all. It's all playing out. So, ladies and gentlemen, the word stand your ground is even more imperative than you've ever imagined in your entire life. So what we're trying to get people to understand tonight, V, in laying out the expert global and geopolitical functionaries that are taking place in this, I'm trying to share with you that this stuff has all been planned for years, and now it's playtime. I think it's there was an interesting statement in the Mad Max movies. I think it was the one with Tina Turner. I don't remember. There was so many years ago, but where she was saying, maybe it was the one about the dome, but and that's where we're at.
Fantastic, Steve. And I just want to.
Yep.
Yes, yeah. Sorry about the delay. We are, folks. I just want to remind people we are on location in Orlando, Florida, and some of the equipment we have to just kind of work with what we've got. So, you know what, Steve? You called this, and if I remember this correctly, you called this about 15 years ago. This U.S. versus Russia, or Russia v. U.S. and the Russian Chinese alliance, and all the geopolitical affairs throughout the Middle East, the Levant, even the Eastern Eurasian. And then, and this is something else. V, you came on last year, and right about this time, maybe a little bit earlier last year, and you laid out a very similar scenario, and people at that time didn't believe that this could happen. But what we're seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, here we've got about 7 minutes before the top of the hour. Correct me if I'm wrong, B. Are we not seeing an assault against the United States, or I shouldn't say United States, but against the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar, as a response in an that was launched, a war that was launched by the West, by America, by NATO, and this is why Benghazi was so important, or is so important in Syria, and all of this. I mean, this started in earnest here in the last, really, 24 months.
Yeah, this is when all these things are coming to a head. You look at 2008, you have the market go bust. And since 2008, they've been trying to, plug all the holes in the dam, and there's just not enough putty or enough fingers or enough mortar to close up all the holes, and the water's about to breach through. That water, folks, that's breaching through, that's about to bust the dam, is all the currency that we've been printing since 2008. It's all that currency that's been put out into the world markets and the Forex exchanges that are coming home to roost. And that's why we're seeing the dollar up high. I mean, think about it. Why do you think that, as they're printing to oblivion, the dollar still stays at a very high rate? It's simply because all that currency that's floating out there is coming back home, creating a temporary rise in purchasing power. Now, this is a mad dash scramble now that's occurring to maintain the illusion of the dollar supremacy. And I've said this before. Your Ponzi scheme is only as good and lasts as long so long as you give the illusion to the investor and they have confidence in your quote-unquote investment. Once the confidence is gone, it's game over. The scheme falls apart, and you're exposed as a con man for who you really are. Now, this is what's happening with the dollar. The confidence is the Achilles heel. And what the Russians and the Chinese have done so brilliantly is expose it to the maximum. Now, last month when I was on, I talked about the largest oil deal done between Russia's Rosneft, which, folks don't realize it's the largest oil company in the world. It's, 2 or 3 times bigger than ExxonMobil, bigger than Royal Dutch Shell. Okay, Russia's largest oil company, Rosneft, signed an energy deal with a Chinese company called Sinopec, where the Chinese will be selling Russian oil at wholesale, bypassing the dollar. So now if any country wants oil, they just go to the Chinese and buy it from them. Why pay the extra fees associated with the dollar when they can buy it from the Russians and the Chinese? It's a no-brainer, folks. And, folks, let me tell you this. Remember what I told you. All the intelligence data from myself, from other guys like W and a few of my other sources that are in the financial world, we are all seeing a late October date for a paradigm shift. And again, this is not something that's going to be reported in the news. It's not something you're going to see in the markets. It's going to be a regular day towards the end of April. But what's going to happen is so significant because of the simple fact that we're going to see a paradigm shift away from the confidence in the dollar. It will be shaken to the core. And many of those countries that sat on the fence about whether or not they should be involved in a bilateral trade or unilateral trade agreements with other nations bypassing the dollar, those countries are going to get off the fence. And that kind of sets us up to what's going to happen in May. In May, Putin has planned to meet with the Chinese, and they're going to ink the largest gas deal ever. And this gas deal is going to be run by Gazprom, the largest natural gas company on the planet. Gazprom will be supplying directly to the Chinese their natural gas. So that's already being set up. The second thing that's being done is you got to realize that what I told you, they have been anticipating the American escapade into the Ukraine. So in response to that, what the U.S. what the Russians have done is this: they've set up pipelines to Germany. Okay, the first pipeline is called the Nord Stream pipe, which is complete, and the South Stream pipe will be completed towards the end of the year. So already the strategic movements have happened, which is going to, in other words, folks, the stage is already set. And if the Russians and the Chinese decide that next week or next month they want to put to bed the dollar forever, they can do it.
End of the dollar right now, or whenever.
Yep.
Whenever.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. I just want to bring people's attention, and Steve, I think we had talked about this before, and folks, if you haven't heard this before, it's really interesting. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Dennis Cuddy was one of the world's foremost experts on the New World Order. Back in 1973, he wrote a memo describing the means for the social control over the world's population by deliberate economic and political destabilization, so that later he called it the debt leash could be used to strangle a rebellious nation into submission to global governance. And this has been the standard operating procedure of the Illuminati, of the people behind the power. And this is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing all of this come into effect. Or seeing this playing out, the global control through the international banking system that controls all of the central banks, the Federal Reserve itself, and the international bankers, the CFR Trilateral Commission, Zygmunt Brzezinski, and don't forget his daughters and media. But isn't it interesting? Everything is controlled. But these various think tanks, which control the Republican, Democrat, all parties, it doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, or whatever, they've actively promoted numerous things to take out the dollar. And now this political destabilization, that's not limited just to the United States, but all across the world. I mean, we got our mitts into everything. And I'm just so thankful that Steve Quayle and V, the Guerrilla Economists, are here to talk more about exactly what's taking place. With that, gentlemen, just hang loose here. We are up against the top of the hour. We get about
wherever the bankers are. You know, it's interesting because a simple statement from Jesus, the love of money is the root of all evil, it's also the control of all evil. And again, when you've got the control of money, and what we've done under U.S. foreign policy in the School of the Americas and our placing of some of the most brutal, torturous, murderous dictators in the world, in the history, have been funded by us, only to be taken out at a later date. You know, Doug, it's like reading the headlines on a given day. Everything now is going bad in America. I remember talking when V and I were on together months ago, and forgive me, I don't remember each show by date, but I do remember the shows by content. And I said, you're going to look to the left and it's going to be coming at you. You're going to look to the right, it's going to be overtaking you. You're going to look behind you, it's coming up upon you. You're going to look in front of you and it's being crashing down upon you. And that's what's happening, whether it's a landslide in Washington or whatever the order of the day, the terror of the day, the train wreck of the day, the airplane wreck of the day. And by the way, let me just share this with everyone. There's a great article on Veterans Today, and I put up an alert. Over the weekend, I talked to two people. One was a Special Forces guy, and I talked through a cutout so that he couldn't be tied to me in any way and harm his identity. And former NOC. NOC is somebody that used to work for the agency, and I'm talking CIA, who's been retired for a long time. Actually, another three-letter agency. But the point being is that not one report, and this is critical, what V and I are trying to do is share with you the truth. Not one report, and I don't know if you knew this, Doug, maybe you did, V, I didn't know this, but every engine that Boeing makes from a certain series of aircraft on not only has the ICAR system on it, but they also have transponders in the engine that you cannot shut off. Doesn't matter what the pilot does or doesn't do. The minute the engines go on, they are transponding, and they are transmitting their location. General McInerney, I can't pronounce his name very well, basically retired lieutenant general, basically said immediately that plane was in Pakistan. It doesn't matter where it ultimately is. There are people saying it's in Diego Garcia. But the whole point of the argument is simply this. If you understand that the pilot was wearing Democracy is Dead T-shirt, if you understand what the 777 can do and who was on it, the lies upon lies upon lies. How can telephones be broadcasting if they're in the water and still be transmitting because wherever they were, at some point somebody's phone picked up a signal, even if it was only short enough to land? Now they're being told, Malaysian government is texting everybody, notice how brave they are, that all their loved ones are dead. This is an operation of heinous, disgusting, and wicked proportion. And I got to tell you, there's a great article. Now, look, when I post articles, it doesn't mean I endorse. Grow up, people. Grow the you-know-what up. You've got to use your own discernment. You've got to seek God, those of you who are Christians, for His wisdom. But what I'm trying to share with you is this, is that lies, 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 bloody lies, horrid lies, I won't use the other word, but the point being is there's a lot of lies out there. And so when you see cover-up after cover-up, going back to the transponder, before I put that up on my alert, I don't know. Doug, did you know that engines had transponders in them? I did not.
No, not until the missing plane, and all of a sudden we know a lot more than about the aircraft.
Right, but I doubt you knew it, because that's kind of a classified thing. V, did you know that the engines had a transponder in them independent of any pilot control?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Well, I think you're too humble sometimes, but that's a good thing. I forget you were a defense analyst, so you know that. So here's the thing. Boeing even intimated they knew where the plane was at, but no one ever questioned them. Meantime, Punch and Judy, the seven dwarfs of network TV are continually showing you these fuzzy-grained, and by the way, I have used some of the most sophisticated thermal imaging equipment that exists that isn't classified, and I can tell you this: what they're showing you is you'd swear you bought it for $198 out of a Russian surplus store after the breakup of the former Soviet Union. There are cars, Audi's geothermal, not geothermal, forgive me, but their thermal, their night vision system on their cars is so detailed that you can see stars in the sky and you can see clouds in the sky. Those of you who drive Audis, which basically have that feature, or whatever car has a night vision, ability, they have incredible resolution. So when I'm seeing fuzzy crates flying and I'm seeing just these inane pictures on and on ad nauseum of airplanes over the specific areas of the ocean, whether it's off the coast of Australia, Indonesia, Straits of Malacca, whatever. The point is, it's can I say this? It's snot, It's vomit, it's vulgar, and it's excrement. How's that for disgusting? It is such a batch of Bravo Sierra that there's no nice way to say it other than that. And that's what the people accept in the United States as truth, because after all, the networks would never lie. So what we're seeing now is something in play that I quite candidly didn't think you would see a whole nation. And obviously there's a small percentage of people that get it, but if lieutenant generals and all their sources are telling you something, who are you going to believe, them, or are you going to believe the network vomit brokers? Unless, and here's the practical point for tonight, I'm going to turn it right over to V, unless you turn off your bloody, and I mean bloody TV, that thing with the dial, the remote, and the telepresence in your life will put you into a state of a brain numbness that will ultimately be responsible for your death. I believe that whether you want to look at it, you can look it up. The patents are on there. I've posted stories on my website, and you can just go do a search. You start using Start Page or IXQuick. Don't use Google. Use some of these other search engines that allow you to search without having your IP recorded. But if you want to really know what's going on, if you were to even grasp the ramifications of 5 of the most important mind control weapons, you'd see it's in what you watch, it's in what you hear, and it's in what you're exposed to day in and day out. So I want to get back to V and how this plays out and why you're seeing China now and Russia being the 2 major gold buyers in the world. And even today, V, they knocked gold down $25 and they knocked silver down, 20-some cents. And people say, well, how can they do that? Why don't you explain to people how the Chinese are being able to buy gold at a discount, physical gold, by basically manipulating, with the help of J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and others, how they're able to buy all the physical gold. How does that take place?
Well, this all goes back decades and decades and decades. I'm probably going to be the only one on the radio that's probably even broken this, but the whole thing that with China, okay, and why the ravenous gold purchases, the price dips low into the 11 or 1200s, they're buying it up at a rapid clip. The price being in the 1300s, and then we saw as high as close to $1,400 per ounce, and then all of a sudden you see the beat down again, and then the Chinese buying more again, even though the physical market is shrinking at such an alarming rate. There's really not much left. What's being taken out also is being taken right out of the refineries. We heard about the Swiss refiners being backed up and delayed. Let me explain what all this means. Years ago, folks, decades ago, the Chinese have placed a significant amount of their gold fortunes, their gold wealth, into the European and British banks. Okay, the Bank of England, they placed it into the various French and German banks, Swiss banks. And so when the globalist forces had this idea to go ahead and create the EU, the European Union, that they've been working on for the last, prior to that time, about 40 years or so, they wanted to really bring it to play. And in order to float the bonds that were needed to get this thing going, what they did is they pledged as collateral the Chinese gold that was in the BOE and that was in the Swiss funds. So that gold was used as collateral for the Eurozone. With and the hopes was that the Eurozone will be sustainable. And of course, these idiots can't, manage anything. They can't manage a convenience store, let alone a country. It's amazing to me how these guys can even balance their own checkbooks. But what, of course, happens is they take the Eurozone, they run it into the ground. The Chinese gold is gone. The banksters have confiscated it. So in this process of having it all gone, now, in the last, I'd say 5 years or so, the Chinese have been really bringing the pressure to bear and demanding repayment of all their gold that they've ever loaned the Europeans. So on top of all the buying that they've been doing, they've been repatriating their gold as well, to the tune that we have 1,000 metric tons of gold leaving the European zone, the Eurozone and and the British Isles every month. They're doing this in order to get back what is rightfully owed to them. J.P. Morgan is involved in the whole same thing because, again, the whole London whale squabble and his debt that went down south that he lost to the tune of $100 billion, not the $2 billion or $9 billion where they left it, but $100 billion, had to do with rehypothecated Chinese gold. Hence, J.P. Morgan is in the process of paying them all back, and their headquarters down here in New York was put up as collateral for that for that debt that was lost. Okay, so this is what's happening, and this is temporal. There's not much being done right now in terms of there's not that much paper to float, or what I'm saying is there's not enough paper left to keep the suppression going. A lot of investors are seeing the handwriting on the wall, and they are waking up to the fact of the idiotic spending habits of the United States, and we're seeing this in the Eurozone, in the Americas. And these investors are waking up and saying, we don't want any part of this. We're going to head for a safe haven. And as the Ukrainian situation unravels and blows up in the United States' face, there's going to be a mad dash to the exit doors. Now, this is why those who have hard assets will win. Why? Well, folks, let me explain to you the type of world we're transitioning towards, and this is very important. Because of the grand mess that they have created in paper, okay? And one thing that you want to call these globalists, these elitists, these powers that be, these New World Order types, is they need paper to manipulate. Without paper, they don't have any power. Paper equals power to these punks, all right? Hence, since the founding of this country, our struggle is not really with the British governments per se. Our struggle from the birth of our nation was against the banksters. It was against the formation of two central banks, and finally the third central bank succeeded. It has always been against the fight of hard currency and hard assets versus paper and fiat. They need this to survive because you cannot manipulate a hard asset. A hard asset is limited, it's finite. It has intrinsic value. So there's not much you can do in terms of manipulating it. So in order to jack up an economic system sky high to the way we have it today, you need fiat, you need paper. That's the Achilles heel. The Russians, the Chinese, the 20 other large economies understand this. And they are in a hard asset buying mode. And we are transitioning into a new world, folks. The new economic reality that we are transitioning in towards is a reality where paper no longer dictates the value of a hard asset, but hard assets will dictate the value of the paper. And what I mean by that is this: he who has the hard assets wins. He who has the gold wins. His currency worth, his economy will be based upon his assets. We don't have none in this country, whereas those in the rest of the world and the rest of the large economies do. Okay? So we in the West will be left holding the bag. We in the West will be on the outside looking in, while the rest of the world goes on and forms their trade zones and trade unions. Now, I told you how all this thing will play out. Another trap, and folks, I'm telling you right now, if the United States decides to pull some sort of a sanction on the Russians, this is how it's going to play. If Vladimir Putin wanted to end the dollar tomorrow, he can do this. He can all of a sudden raise the price of oil. Now, we know that $115, $120 is somewhat sustainable for the U.S. It's at a 115 is sustainable. 120 we're at a breaking point. At $150 a barrel, there's no way we can sustain it. At that point, we have a complete crisis. Trucks can't move, planes can't move. It becomes a logistical nightmare. There's gridlock in the supply chains, supply shortages, and we crumble and implode as an economy. We just cannot take that type of hit. Not only can Putin raise the price of oil to that level, But he can also, as a double whammy, say, pay me in gold or pay me in yuan, and it effectively put an end to the entire petrodollar system. That's trap number one. Trap number two that we see forming, and we remember what happened with the Saudis at the Sochi Olympics. The second trap that could happen is you could have the Saudis, who right now feel extremely isolated. Okay, they're feeling extremely isolated because of what has occurred with the whole Syrian debacle. Now, one of the things that I highlighted the last time that I spoke was we have the Saudi Arabians pumping 90% water and 10% oil. Okay, they're not producing. Their wells are tapping out. The largest wells they have are running dry. So what are they going to do? Their energy war for energy takeover to control energy markets in the Middle East has failed. And the U.S. left them high and dry when they exited Syria. So now the Saudis and the rest of the Middle East is in chaos. We hear about the Saudis pulling their ambassadors and the United Arab Emirates and Oman and Qatar, and Jordan and Egypt. They're all pulling their ambassadors out of Qatar. Qatar is like the U.S. honeybee over at in the Middle East. You know, that's where our largest naval base in the Middle East is stationed, and it also happens to be the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood. The rest of the Muslim world cannot stand the Muslim Brotherhood because of the vast destabilization that has occurred. So these Arab fiefdoms are in chaos. OPEC is coming apart at the seams. So into this vacuum, into this chaos, guess who steps in? China. And why would China step in? Well, the Middle East's biggest trading partner is not the United States. It's not the European Union. No. The biggest trading partner, to the tune of $300 billion a year, is the Chinese. And at that point, folks, here comes Putin's second revenge. The Saudis that have once threatened Putin at the Sochi Olympics, all of a sudden will be taken by their nose and forced to participate, because right now their life has to depend on it, in a yuan-backed or a petro-yuan. This is what's occurring, folks. And I'm not even going to get into, actually I'm going to get into the biggest trade agreement ever being penned right now as we speak, and that's RCEP. And no one's talking about it. RCEP is the world's largest regional trade agreement. Now, we heard about when Obama went to the ASEAN nations. That's, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. And he went over to the ASEAN countries. There's 10 members in ASEAN. And he was kicked out. Within about a day and a half, he was kicked out. And he came back home. Because the ASEAN told him, go take a hike. We don't need you. You guys are old news. We don't want the dollar. We'd rather trade among ourselves. Well, RCEP, RCEP, 10 members of the ASEAN countries, and combines them with China, Australia, India, South Korea, New Zealand, and guess who else? Japan. That's right. The Japanese who are on life support, there's somebody in that government that has a brain that's finally starting to think that, hey, maybe we need to make nice with the Chinese. Maybe we need to, because they are, after all, our largest trading partner, maybe we need to make nice with them. And the Japanese are turning towards the east, folks. The second largest bond market in the world, and America's closest ally in the Pacific region, is turning east towards China. And they're signing backdoor agreements to get this done. Let me tell you what this looks like. Let me tell you, I just gave you names of countries. Let me show you the numbers here. What I mentioned in RCEP is 60% of global GDP. That's right, boys and girls. That's bigger than the United States and Europe combined in GDP. That's over 50% of global trade. And that region contains over 70% of global manufacturing. Now, you explain to me, why in the world do they need the dollar? Explain to me what sole purpose can the United States even serve in this trade zone? Exactly nothing. And the second biggest trade zone, which comprises 13 or 14 time zones, is the Eurasian trade zone. And that's a huge trade block. And guess who's going to be involved in that too? Germany. That's right. Germany will be leaving the Eurozone. They pay lip service to the European Union, but they'll be leaving the Eurozone. And you're going to see them hitch their wagons to the Eurasian trade zone. And between those two trade zones, it's over with. And that's why I said in 2012 and 2013, every single trade agreement that's been hammered out had nothing to do with the dollar. It had everything to do with yuan convertibility and gold-backed settlement. That's it. So think about this, folks. People say, well, V, what about the West? Well, let me tell you something. There are certain elements in the West that are waking up. My contacts in the City of London have specifically told me, V, we will not support a single sanction against the Russians. We won't support it. We'll pay lip service, but we won't support it. The reason why we won't support it is simple. We love Russian money. And, folks, if you've ever been to London, I'll tell you this right now. I've been there. There is a great deal of Russian investment in the City of London. There's a great deal of Russian real estate that's owned in London. The Russians take advantage. The City of London loves the fact, the bankers in London love the fact that the Russians take advantage of British tax havens in the Cayman Islands, in Gibraltar, in the British Virgin Islands. They love that fact. They're not going to lose that relationship because America can't get its act together. The Swiss, who are late to the party, after they've ruined over 500 years of a banking reputation, decide, hey, we're kind of screwed up here. Let's make nice with the Russians and the Chinese. So they're waking up. So the Brits and the Swiss and the Norwegians, and Norway, by the way, is like the wealthiest country in the world per capita, folks. Per capita. The wealthiest, most stable economy, most stable country in the world, Norway. The Norwegians are going the way of Russia and China, and that is one of the most wealthiest nations. And they're going to be setting up trading partners with them. So where does that leave the U.S.? Well, leave the U.S., the French idiots, the broken-down Spaniards, the broke Italians, and the destitute, poverty-stricken Portuguese on the outside looking in. Maybe they'll get a few crumbs off the table, but in terms of the United States, we are facing isolation. We are seen as a rogue state. We are seen as the problem child that's going to need an economic spanking, and we're going to be taken out. I'm not talking about nukes falling out of the sky. What I'm talking about, we're going to be taken out economically, because at that point, there's no need to fire a shot. At that point, this is exactly what I said. What the Chinese are setting up, and this is what my sources have said to me, they've been setting up industrial zones, 100,000 square feet, square mile industrial parks in upstate New York and in Iowa, okay? An idle manufacturing bump, but they're buying it out in Pittsburgh and in Detroit, Michigan, and in Cleveland, Ohio, and Camden, New Jersey, and Newark. Why are they doing all this? Because when this entire global economy realigns into a hard asset, hard commodity-backed economy, we will be on the outside looking in, and we will have a worthless, hyperinflated currency that's going to be as good as toilet paper. And at that point, folks, the American worker will be one of the most cheapest workforce in the world. And at that point, you're going to see the Chinese utilize us to make Apple iPhones in a Foxconn over here. You're going to see Nike utilize Americans in a sweatshop right here maybe in upstate New York, making Nike shoes for $1.25 an hour. This is the reality we're stepping into. We have allowed lunatics to ruin the finest economy in the world. We have allowed lunatics to sell you a bad bag of goods, sell you the lie that we're a consumer-based economy, and we're left holding the bag. We are nothing. We are a cancerous growth on the global economic playing field. And nobody wants to play with us anymore. The game is over. And people already see globally that the emperor has no clothes. This is why China was so quick to throw their hat in the ring with the Russians over Crimea. And the Indians, so quick. And what I tell you about the other trade zones that are going on, even with India, okay? And the Iranians and the Turks, they're all tilting east. The BRICS. These are all in play, and we are seeing a commodity powerhouse, which is the Russians, and an industrial superpower, which is the Chinese, coming together, creating a new economic world order, and putting the Western banksters on the outside looking in. Folks, that's the world we're heading into. And they hold all the cards.
Yep. V, it's interesting that you mentioned that we will be the slave labor, and we obviously, I do believe that. V, the benefit here, I just want to make sure that people understand this, and maybe you can just touch on this again. You mentioned Saudi Arabia, and Steve, you and I spoke, and well, all the three of us spoke about Saudi Arabia here the last couple of programs. The Saudis saw what we did in Egypt, and of course they weren't too impressed. And I'll get emails after a program like this, Steve and V, from people saying, well, China, China, their economy is a little bit rough, and, they hold a lot of U.S. paper, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, how do you fix a bad economy? Well, two words, cheap energy. In a way, are we not seeing Saudis being pushed into the arms of China, V?
Yes, absolutely. And they're being put there because of us and the idiotic foreign policy that we're running, and the idiots that are in charge of this administration running the country to the ground. That's what's happening. We're not only chasing the Saudis into the Chinese arms, but we're chasing every single person that has any sort of resource or benefit or beneficial business that can be that we can engage with. We're pushing them directly into the arms of the Russians and the Chinese. We are totally being isolated, Doug.
Gotcha. And Steve, we've talked about this too. I'm just going to toss it back to you, Steve. Oh, by the way, I just want folks to know, and in fact, Steve and V, I'll tell you this. I did not get a chance to tell you this before, and ladies and gentlemen, emails that I'm getting, thank you very much for your emails. For whatever reason right now, for the last 24 hours, I have not been able to send emails. I just want to let you know that. I can receive them. I cannot respond to them. I've got somebody working on that as we speak. But go ahead, Steve. Take it from here.
Well, I think it goes back to this. I think that, and look, I don't buy the liberal bull, of the revision version of history. Okay, let me take everyone to Deuteronomy 28, and starting at the 43rd verse, and I'll read about 6 or 7 verses. Now, listen to this. This is Deuteronomy 28. Tell me if this doesn't apply. The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Just put into that parentheses. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because you hearken not unto the voice of the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and statutes which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon you a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. And he goes on to say, verse 48, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until he has destroyed you. The Lord shall bring, verse 49, the Lord shall bring a nation against thee from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue you shall not understand. Doug, when I read that, and I put, how do I say, when I read that, let me read the 50th verse, I'm sorry. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle, and the fruit of your land, until you be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kine, or the flocks of thy sheep, until he has destroyed thee. Every single thing that we see, whether, we talk, Doug, on your show at different times about Russian Spetsnaz, about Chinese troops in Mexico, in Canada, the battle plan, the dreams of vision. But all it boils down to this, is we were a nation that once honored and esteemed God, and how the entire liberal Christian community can sit back in their silence, or the conservative Christian community for that matter, and see the total devastation against Christians around the world. And isn't it interesting? Everywhere that the persecution of Christians start is an offshoot of the policies of the current administration. And ladies and gentlemen, you may find that hard to believe, but the tree is known by the fruit it bears. I think, Doug, we have tree avoidance glasses on most people. There is a pall of what I would call damnable ignorance in this country. There is a pall of denial beyond description in this country. You can call it normalcy bias or whatever. But the bottom line is that the Word of God says that because we choose to believe a lie versus the truth of Him, His Word, His Son, His redemption, His power, His resurrection, we're given over to believe that lie. And I can only tell you this, that the only answer for being given over to believe a lie is either one, destruction, or repentance. And you know, I hear that we get a lot of flack, especially after last week's show, from, quote, evangelicals. Well, who do those no accounts think they are? Hey, you're right, we're no accounts, but the one thing we're provoking somebody who thinks they're big shots in the evangelical world is to consider your ways. This whole country could not have gotten into the mess it's in except the fish rots from the head first. The pulpits are silent. I think it was good night. One of the famous evangelists, and psalm from David's harp. I can't think of the guy's name right now. Charles Finney, who said that when America or any nation's destroyed, it's because of corruption in the pulpit. Need I say more? You go to Drudge, and you have one of the leading Catholic judges. The statement he makes is that this administration is totally responsible for anti-Christian bias throughout the world. And yet you see the people, who voted for him just shouting and clapping that he's their savior. I would like to remind every person of color, white, black, or any other color schemes that Jesus is savior and God, not the state. Therein lies the problem. And because we have done these things, look, it can't get any plainer. The stranger that is within thee shall get up very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee. China has lent to us, and thou shalt not lend to him. And he shall be the head, and we shall be the tail. And unfortunately, the tail is what really, is not the best part of the body when it comes to being able to see what's going on. Unfortunately, most people have to extricate their eyeballs from where they shouldn't be, and I'll say it tactfully, and begin to see the real world around them, because it's not the pretty picture. And until they get hungry, until their kids go to sleep whining, crying, and Daddy, I'm hungry, or Mommy, until we see blood in the streets, till we see just the innocents slaughtered and then righteous people mowed down, I don't think outside of repentance on the order of Nineveh is going to change anything. What B is giving everybody tonight is a warning. You're hearing an analyst, you're hearing an analytical approach to explaining the chessboard, right? And you're seeing the moves and counter moves, but it all means you're in deep trouble. Doug, I tried to get people years ago to realize that food they would buy at one price would give them an inherent raise in their cost of living. In other words, they would be able to buy food at one point in history and not have to spend more at a latter point in history. Well, that was met with, you're just trying to sell fear to sell food. Well, now, eat your heart out, because obviously hamburgers approaching $4 a pound, and beef is the highest it's been since they started keeping track of it. And little by little, in Deuteronomy, it talks about the fields being smitten. It talks about the fruit of the land and all the labors, and that the nation which thou knowest not will eat up, and you will be crushed and oppressed. I got news for you. That's where we're at. And until people get it, and I'm afraid it's too late to get it, the few that can hear will hear, and to hear and to act. And look, it is scary, but it's not scary if you put it in the context of faith. And I take on my critics and those who say, you guys sell fear to sell gold or silver or food or whatever. No, we're telling you what the smart people who are going to destroy this country are doing, and we're saying don't be a victim, and by all means don't be a refugee unless you can be a refugee led by the Spirit of God out of this country and be able to take what God has given to you with you. And continue on, because right now I believe that we are at, let's just say this, we're at moments of mercy And when the moments of mercy over, the flurry of evil will fall upon us, just as that landslide in Washington came quickly. And by the way, the name OSO, O-S-O, one of my friends who's an intercessor, Beata, said that stands for bear. And instantly she got it, that just as the landslide came out of no place and covered the land in that area, so will this invasion and so will our demise cover us fastly. It doesn't matter if you're starved into submission, Stalingrad. It doesn't matter if you're blown into oblivion. Either way, our days are numbered. And I rebuke those who say, well, you don't love your country very much. No, I love the foundation principles of my country, and because I care for people, I'm trying to warn them, trying to help them. And as somebody who's been on talk radio for 23 years, and Doug, I know that if we get 100, 1,000, 10,000 through all the broadcasts we're blessed to be able to have, then it helps. It's time for the people of God to wise up. I can't tell you how many emails I get from this prophet or that prophet. Never heard of them. To my knowledge, they've never done anything, but they're a prophet of God wanting to set me straight. Well, you guys go out and win the lost, because the Bible says he who winneth souls is wise. And he who listens to wise counsel. Look, V rubs shoulders with some pretty heavy people. I know some pretty heavy people. I know people that have successfully acquired a lot of money. Obviously, I try and win some of those people to Jesus, and sometimes, I do the best job I can, and not because I want their money. I want them to realize that their money isn't going to go into the grave with them, so why not help the veterans of the United States? Why not help the people that were willing to die once for their country? Now don't let them die before your eyes because they're being cut off. And again, Doug, no one called that earlier or more concisely than I did, and yet I couldn't even get the vets to go along with it at that point. Now the ones that are still alive are starting to see. So, the point that we've got to make is understand this. Every war is economically based. You can have the righteous indignation, but it always ends up with religion is applied to resources, and when God blessed those who walked in his way, he blessed them with resources. Abraham wasn't blessed with Federal Reserve notes, IRAs, Kios, and 401ks. He was plenteous in goods, and the rest of the world understands that, and evidently the American investor doesn't. He's willing to stake his family's life, his provision and future provision on paper promises of a magician's illusion that are worth absolutely not even the ink they're printed on, because it's invisible ink, and the ink will disappear before their very eyes as their wealth or what they've stored up is wiped out before them. Go ahead, V.
One of the things you'd have to see here, folks, is this. The advancement of how Putin so tactically and so precisely taken over Crimea and annexed it, okay? It's already provided a blueprint of for a lot of the tensions in the Pacific. And what I mean by that is this. Putin provided the blueprint for the Chinese to take over Taiwan. And to clarify that, those things that he laid out with that Crimea takeover was, number one, to move fast and act very decisively, which he's done. Make sure that there's very little violence, and you have to have the mobilization of insiders. This Crimea fall will not only reverberate to a massive embarrassment of the United States, which will cause a great paradigm shift towards the end of April, which by the 2015 we will be on the ropes economically and financially speaking, where you will see a dollar dump happening faster at a faster rate. And then you will see strongholds of either U.S. alliances or treaties or partners or commonwealths or whatever have you, assets, like Taiwan, fall back into the hands of the Chinese, and nothing will be done. Okay? Let me tell you something, folks. Losing China and losing Ukraine was more strategically grievous to the United States than Taiwan will be. So if the United States did nothing but turned its tail and ran from Syria, if they did nothing but sit there and watch as we get absolutely pummeled and embarrassed, because there's really nothing we can do. The servant is always a slave, okay? The borrower is always a servant to the lender, so to speak. And a creditor nation such as Russia is to the United States, the creditor nation will be always able to pull the strings. So there's not going to be no great action on part of the United States to strike at the heart of Russians or try to take or overturn the moves in Crimea. There's nothing that's going to be done. And just as that will turn into a massive embarrassment, you can see in the Pacific the U.S. doing nothing. Will the Chinese take over the Senkaku Islands, which will occur, and it will occur very quickly because the Chinese are mobilized for a very fast, short war to take the Senkakus if need be. And I think the Japanese will probably just give it to them, or they will come into some sort of agreement where the Japanese will quote unquote hold the island, but give the drilling rights all over. Hand all those drilling rights over to the Chinese companies like PetroChina or Sinopec. This is what's going to happen. Taiwan will be integrated because Putin just gave the Chinese their playbook. And the U.S. will sit on the sidelines and do nothing. You know, I said earlier in the broadcast, desperate people do stupid things. One of the most stupidest things ever done was the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the TPP, I like to call the toilet paper protocols. And the toilet paper protocols was some idiot's great idea. Hey, let's start a trade union in Asia, but let's exclude China. And let's make sure that trade agreement has language in there that only benefits the U.S. Well, good luck with that. Because the TPP is pretty much dead, DOA, dead on arrival. No one has anything to do with it. So these motions, and now we're working on the Atlantic version of the TPP, and that's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't matter what they do with the Atlantic version, because all you have left is a bunch of broke countries sitting around trading paper all day, while the rest of the world is accumulating massive amounts of wealth, where there are more billionaires being made and millionaires being made in China and in Russia and in India than anywhere in the United States or even in the West. And we're sitting on the sidelines watching this whole entire thing go by, folks. Okay? That's where we're at. And this transition is something that people have to prepare for. Okay? The U.S., if you look about it, when we went into the sanction thing, which I found to be pretty funny, when the Obama announced that, they're going to start sanctioning key individuals that are part of Putin's inner crowd, and, the Russians had to pretty much laugh at that. In the U.S., what do? Well, they released some strategic reserves. Okay, they released some of the strategic reserves of oil, trying to basically sell the Europeans on the idea that the U.S. supporting liquid natural gas or and all the EU energy needs, just in case Russians decide to cut off all the energy to Europe. And to clarify that is this: the Europeans get about 30% or more of their energy needs from the Russians. And the U.S. sold the Europeans bad goods because the European bureaucrats there in the EU are idiots. They're stupid. Like I told you, folks, these guys can't balance their own checkbooks. They can't run a convenience store, but they're running a nation. So the U.S. convinced these guys, because, we got the best salesmen working for us, that, hey, no problem, support this little NGO subversion takeover of Ukraine, and don't worry about the Russians cutting off the gas supplies, because we have gas supplies over here in the Marcellus Shale and in the hydrofracking we're doing all over the place over here in America. We'll be able to supply, and we'll release some of the oil that we have at our strategic petroleum reserves, and that should help alleviate your market. And that was the carrot that the U.S. put on the end of the stick to assure the Europeans that they won't have any sort of an energy crisis when Gazprom decides to, hey, you know what, we're going to cut off supplies. Which, by the way, folks, the Russians have already demanded that the Ukrainians pay their gas bill, which is to the tune of $2 billion, which is owed, right? So we're seeing all these things happen, and in response to the United States saying, hey, you know what, John Kerry and Mr. Barry O saying that we're going to put sanctions on Russian key diplomats. Well, the Russians said, okay, fine, we'll just dump $105 billion of your treasury bonds, and that's exactly what they did on March 12th. They dumped $105 billion worth of our treasury bonds directly on the market. And they don't care, folks. You see, because here's the thing. The borrower is always a servant to the lender. And he who has the gold wins. So there's no problem there. The U.S. aggression is pretty much the final straw. And they will move, and I'm talking about the world, especially the emerging markets. They will move in accordance to contain now and isolate the United States. This is a bad, bad predicament. Okay? When you're having all these trade zones set up, and we don't have any part of it. And folks, earlier in the broadcast, I talked about Syria. I talked about the Ukraine. These are strategic pivot points. Okay? Syria, Ukraine, Turkey, Iran, and the Koreas are strategic pivot points. And these pivot points that we're lost, we pretty much lost them. These pivot points are the very channels, and I want you folks to listen very carefully to this, what I'm about to say. These pivot points are the very channels from which all the hard assets and resources will flow and are remediated. Folks, Turkey is having massive upheavals. They are moving towards the east every single day. They are realigning. They don't want to do anything with NATO anymore. They don't want to be part of the EU. They don't want any of that nonsense. They are realigning to the east. And Turkey will regain its historical role as a remediation point in a gold-backed trade, as a point of settlement between nations in the trade of goods. You're going to see that happen. It's going to be a strategic pivot point. Crimea, or East Ukraine, folks, as it's going to be called pretty much, will be a strategic pivot point in the whole entire Eurasian trade zone that's emerging. This is huge, huge, massive news. The pipelines, it will be done by the end of next year, the 2015 in Syria, okay, is a pivot point. And guess who's coming on board? We want to talk about strange bedfellows here, huh? Israel is going to be signing agreements with the Russians and the Iranians to partake with the Syrians in this energy deal, because there's some smart people in the Knesset that are starting to wake up, and they're trying to figure out, hey, you know what, being following the bad boy on the block and being the junior bully in the neighborhood, it doesn't quite work out well. And they have some gas rights right off their shore, the same shale gas that's the same offshore drilling platforms and the resources that the Syrians have. Israel has access to some of those deposits as well. And they're cutting into the deal as well. And again, they're going to be settling and remediating and converting their shekels into yuans or rubles or gold. They're not going to be dealing with the dollar. So all these things are happening. These are all real trade agreements, folks. That's the structure of what's happening. You want to see what the world will look like in the next 5 to 10 years? Here it is. It's all these trade agreements. It's all these currency swaps that are already set up. It's already done. It's already been inked to paper. It's signed. It's sealed. It's delivered. Only thing that the world's waiting for is for the U.S. to be officially taken out of the picture as a world economic superpower, and the dollar to be no longer used as the world reserve currency. And even the emerging markets, okay, even the emerging markets where, they were affected greatly by the Fed tapering because they've seen such a spike in their energy and food purchasing. They said, we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to harbor the costs and burden the costs of dealing in the dollar. We'd rather go and swap our own currencies and get what we need. They're leaving, folks, okay? And what's happening in this whole situation because we've been made to look like idiots. We've been made to look like a rogue nation in front of a global stage. The world is perceiving right now that the Russians are fighting on the moral high ground. And there are many in the world that see the U.S. that we're the tyrants. We're the evil empire now. It's amazing how the roles have flipped from the 1980s. And folks, I'm telling you right now, the Russians are fighting, and this is their mantra. They're fighting for Christianity and Holy Mother Russia. Those are their words, not mine, by the way. And folks, I'm telling you that this is amazing what's happening. Okay, we had Napoleon who conquered all of Europe, and then he turned east, and he faced the Russians, and he got slaughtered. And we had Hitler who conquered all of Europe, and then he turned east, faced the Russians, and he got beat. And we got the U.S. and NATO and the EU, conquered much of the whole world. Now we're turning towards Russia economically and geostrategically speaking, and we're having the can take that of us. This is not going to end well, folks. It's not going to end well at all. Steve or Doug?
Yeah, Steve, this is really the culmination, or at least this chapter culminating the plans of the globalists, the Luciferians, the satanic agenda, those people in power, the power brokers. I mean, you know, all we have to do is look at what look at what happened with Libya, Benghazi. No one wants to talk about it. Benghazi. It's amazing that being the third rail of the media and of course politicians. No one can be honest about it. But what that's all about is the destabilization of Syria, and that really is like the crux of what we're the Middle East policy of the Obama regime. I got to tell you, and people want to downplay it. Hillary, what difference does it make? 200,000 dead and tens of, well, at least a few million refugees. My goodness, I can't believe the lack of humanity. Well, I can, but taking place. But we're approaching the end game here, Steve, aren't we?
Well, yeah, I think that's the difference between. I guess here's the disconnect, Doug, and I want people to really put this into perspective. You can be the greatest student of prophecy. You can have all of the knowledge that you ever thought you would need or wanted to have. You can have all that. But there comes a point where you must just, I guess you'd say, reflect in real time that this is it. This is at this point in time, this is really taking place, because so many people have a theology or even a belief system that somehow all these bad things will happen, but they'll never have to deal with them. And you basically see the slaughter in Syria. And I got to tell you, one of the greatest tragedies, in my opinion, is the church in the West being silent about our brethren being slaughtered in North Korea, in Syria, all over the globe, and we do nothing, say nothing, in the Congo, Central African Republic, Kenya, you know, all of the places. I obviously understand they've changed their names, and I'm an old-fashioned guy when it comes to calling nations by their true name. Obviously, I remember when Rhodesia was Rhodesia. But the point I'm trying to make, Doug, is this is where the rubber meets the road. And I think that God, literally, I'll say this one more time. These are moments of mercy. He has raised up the different voices, mine and so many others, yours. V's got the, and V makes no apology for his faith in Jesus. V's got the best handle, I believe, in my opinion. I'm not flattering him, but the Bible says give honor to whom honors due, credit to whom credit's due, of how it's playing out. But we can't do anything for the people that just say, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it. Yet they listen, and then they send their, how do I say this tactfully, their diatribes. Save your diatribes. If you want to go on a diatribe, go get diapers. That's probably more productive than a diatribe, because you're going to have to deal with it. It doesn't matter if food goes up 5% a month, 8% a month, whatever the percentage it goes up, it's going up to the point where it will always be available, but at what price? I love the people that say they can't eat gold and silver. I'll say it one more time. You can take gold, silver, any place in the world, and on 1 ounce of gold in Argentina, for instance, you could probably live for 6 months with a steak dinner twice a day. So the point is that we've got people that don't understand commodities, that only live in a paper-based world, now ready to go down in a flame. It's just like holding the piece of paper up in the air, and that represents your entire life, your earning, your calories. And by the way, convert dollars into calories, convert what you spend on your monthly shopping bill for groceries for your family, and that represents calorie units, which can relate to dollars, and as your dollars decrease, your calorie units decrease, and hunger rises. Are we at the top of the hour, Doug?
Yes, sir, we are, and thanks for noticing that. Folks, you're listening to a very special edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. It is Monday, March 24th, 2014. We are broadcasting live from Orlando, on location, Orlando, Florida, where it is a nice 73 degrees out. Compared to V, I guess, in New York, a little bit colder, as well as Steve in Montana, a little bit colder than that. We're right back after these messages. Stay with us. You're listening to V, the Guerrilla Economist, and, of course, our very special friend, Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com. Stay with us. We're hour of this Hagmann, the Hagmann Report, this the 24th day of March, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me is Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com, be the Guerrilla Economist, roguemoney.net. Folks, visit both websites, bookmark both websites, check there every day. As a matter of fact, I do critical information 24/7. So glad that they're joining us, joining me here as I fly solo. Appreciate that. Steve and V, I just want to share with you one interesting experience, and I'm going to turn it over I'll turn it over to Steve after this. But I just want to share this. Coming down to the conference, we had driven by car and had stopped in just north of Savannah, Georgia. It was kind of a long drive, and it was fraught with some issues. But anyway, we had stopped at somewhat of a rest area just north of Savannah, and of course there were signs all over the place advertising Jekyll Island Visitor Center, or visit, not the center, but information about Jekyll Island. And I had come upon a booth where this woman was giving this couple information about Jekyll Island and what to do there, but also its history. And she explained in great detail what was with the history of Jekyll Island, but omitted, if you will, and if you can believe this, any reference to the creation of the Federal Reserve, the backstory of the Federal Reserve and what had taken place on Jekyll Island, really just over 100 years ago this year, or 100 years ago here, this past decade, I should say, not this year, but in the run-up to the passage of the Federal Reserve. I just thought that was fascinating. And Steve, I'll just toss it to you. I just thought that was fascinating.
Well, we're at a point now. I'm going to turn it right back to V, because I think we're fighting, and I know this, for hours and days now. Okay, I don't know if the days turn into hours. Forgive me, the hours will turn into days. But where we go from here, the greatest disconnect I know, and I want B to articulate this because he's really good at this, and I can't do it as well as he can do. There is a dislocation in the cerebral cortex and the cerebellum. In other words, there is a void and emptying of the cranial capacity of Americans to figure out what it means when the dollar dies. V, will you spell it out? Because we're trying to get people out of harm's way. We're not trying to sell them this or sell them that. We're trying to get them out of harm's way. But look, if you want to jump in front of the subway, don't gripe at us for trying to keep you on the boardwalk and off the track. So, V, I'm not kidding you. I'm getting emails. Well, what does it mean to me? Will you tell people what it means when the dollar dies? I evidently can't. I mean, I've got on record.
If anybody wants to see what the dollar death would look like, I mean, go on YouTube, type in Weimar Republic, watch some videos, watch some documentaries about what happened to Germany when they hyperinflated to oblivion, okay? Watch that document very carefully, all right, because that's exactly what's going to happen here. We are moving, folks, from a time, and this is the greatest, this is what I've been saying for quite some time now, that we are moving from into the greatest period of economic transition in the world history. A couple of things ended, folks, okay? The days of U.S. bullying, it's over. It's done. It's finished. It died in Crimea, okay? The dollar is going to die in the Ukraine. It's over with, all right? And when you see that you got to spend $50 for a loaf of bread, the pain's going to hit you. When you look at that, the first hit is going to be gasoline. When you got to pay $10 at the pump, and it's going to hit you. And you're not going to know what to do when you see empty store shelves because there's no trucks that's going to be able to get those foods out there. Okay? This is why I tell people to have some food on hand. I'm not telling you to store, 15, 20 years worth of food here. Have at least some food in your house for supply disruptions, which historically happens in every single economic crash. Now, most people don't know this, but I have over 800 years of economic data at my fingertips, and I can see the repetitive pattern over and over again. So it's important that you have the wherewithal in order to transcend this coming time of shortage. We're heading for hyperinflation. Look at what happened in Argentina. That's a perfect case in point recently in 2001. Okay, food prices go up. The supply chain problems happen, just like in Venezuela, where they devalued their bolivar, I think 2 or 3 times. Where now companies that are out there, distributors that are out there distributing goods, they don't want to distribute because they don't know what the price of the good is going to be tomorrow. So they hold on to it, and it creates a supply chain problem. Imagine you waiting online trying to get toilet paper. This is the world. Excuse me. That you're going to be living in. The days of, running around in your fancy car and all, that's all over with, folks. The only people that will be able to do that are those in hard assets. Well, you might ask yourself a question, well, Lee, what the heck do you mean? Listen carefully. We are moving from a world of gunboat diplomacy, okay? We're moving from a world of paper and bombs, and we are moving to a world of energy diplomacy. We're moving to a world of hard asset diplomacy. These are the things that are going to define the economic world of this near future that we're moving in transitioning into. If you do not have one of those 2 things, you're done. You're finished. If you're holding paper, if you think you're done, look, let me be honest with you. How many times, okay, you buy a pack of gum? How many of you remember when a pack of gum was a quarter or 50 cents? Now it's $1.50. You're talking about over 100% inflation in the price of gum. I mean, it's unbelievable how you can track how devalued your dollar has become. And you need to understand that unless you begin to take those steps to move out of the dollar, get into hard assets, get into silver, man. It's the cheapest thing to get involved with. Get silver. You got no excuses for it. If you can't get 1 ounce, get junk silver. Buy a few pre-1964 dimes, nickels, quarters, little by little. These are great ways for you to preserve your wealth. And towards the end of the program, I'm going to give you there's an opportunity that I'm going to give you guys, and I've received a ton of emails. V, I'm unemployed. V, I'm in between jobs. V, my company's about to lay me off. V, I'm working. I've been at my company for 10, 15 years, but due to all sorts of different circumstances, I need additional forms of income. Folks, there's a business opportunity that one of the oil gurus that I've met with has offered, and I'm going to offer it to any single person, and it doesn't cost you a penny. It is completely legit. It's so legitimate that Forbes magazine wrote an article about it, okay? That's how clear-cut and honest this system is. And if towards the end of the program, email me. I'll tell you all about it. This is for people who need an additional form of income, who need a help to start creating money that you can use to start buying some of these hard assets that we're talking about. That me and Steve always try to hammer into your heads what real wealth and real money is all about. This is a way for you to do it, okay? This realignment that's happening, folks, it's tremendous. It's absolutely tremendous because, we are seeing, we're seeing a move that's unprecedented. Okay, and we're losing prestige in every arena. You know, one of the things that the U.S. and I don't know if you guys know this, Doug or Steve, but one of the things that we've always been instrumental in is the International Monetary Fund. Well, the last 2 years, the United States hasn't been funding the International Monetary Fund, and Congress refuses to vote on the International Monetary Fund because, you know, they're Congress and they continue to bicker. So what's happening right now is that China is going to back up Russia, and they're going to pull the full weight of its new, and I don't know if you folks know this or not, but because of the U.S. absence, the Chinese have been controlling the IMF for the last 2 years, okay? And they are going to put they're going to start pushing for the tremendous amounts of reforms in the IMF, okay, without the U.S. This is unprecedented. This is incredible. And nobody's reporting on this. And what it effectively does, folks, is this. It strips the U.S. of every single veto power and influence in a major international monetary regulatory agency. It strips them from all power when it comes to regards to loans and international monetary functions. It strips them of all this, and you're going to see the IMF get gutted. And it will be, and you can write this down, it will be integrated ever so slowly with the new forming BRICS Bank. Again, the pivot east. And you folks, you got to understand, the IMF, which is one half of the World Bank, is one of the crowning jewels of the Western banksters. It has been the base of operations for many jackals. It's been the base of operations for many, and the origin of many of government overthrows that have occurred in the last 50 years. And this apparatus of destruction, this apparatus of financial servitude and destitution is now in control of China. And what are the Chinese doing? They're going to ramrod reforms without the U.S. even being involved. And they're going to strip the IMF of its power. Okay, the U.S. used the IMF as a springboard for a lot of insider financial operations. They're going to strip it of its power and integrate it into the BRICS Bank. How do you like them apples, folks? This is, again, the U.S. influence dying. This is, again, the isolation that we're talking about and the pressure for these reforms to happen. And even though Congress is sitting there with their hands folded, the pressure for circumventing the U.S. is also starting to build with the G20. And folks, like I told you before, who cares about the G7? Who cares about the bunch of broke nations that hardly even meet? When the action is with the G20, where you have large, functioning, and vibrant economies that meet every year. The G20 meeting in Australia, China completely tore the U.S. a new one. They told us that we're living off the printing press, that we have no real industry, that we're in a fake economy and an artificial prosperity. Those are their own words. And we're seeing OPEC coming apart, and they're moving against the very source of the Syria provocation, which is Qatar. And Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Egypt and Bahrain and all, they're all moving in to support what China is doing, what the East is coming together. And this is not an East versus West, folks. This is just the way the chips are lined out. This is what's happening. And the Gulf, thanks to, Obama and the administration's wisdom about the Arab Spring, all they did is just create a perfect, fertile environment for China to come in with the petro-yuan. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And what are we facing here at home? Massive hyperinflation. And you see these idiotic Keynesians, these talking heads on TV, these academians, and they can't explain this, what I call an oxymoronic black swan event. Okay? They can't explain the fact how monetary hyperinflation is killing capital. and that it's causing massive systemic failure. They can't figure that out. And folks, this is what I've been saying for some time now. Traditional mechanics of money have been destroyed in this country, and it will remain so long as the Federal Reserve is functioning. Okay, any sort of mechanics of money has been thrown out the window. Thus, you cannot rely on the Dow. You can't rely on the S&P or the NASDAQ. The sad reality is, folks, since 2008, there's been zero capital formation for new businesses. Since 2008. All the creative money that's been dumped into black holes called bank derivatives and toxic bond purchases. And fiat, and this is what kills me on fiat, it's a failed system. It's never worked. It's always studied incredibly well, but it's never fixed. And it's horrible. And it's the worst track record. And because of what's happening with us and our Ponzi scheme fiat system, that's done nothing but create unsustainable debt. It's done nothing but absolutely create toxicity and baseless speculation that provokes bad investment and create inflation. That's all it's been doing. Now, couple that with all the actions we've been taking in the Ukraine and in Syria, we are being singled out. We are being singled out as the main source, as a rogue nation. We're being cited, caught red-handed, as the very source of every financial fraud, the source of every bond fraud, the source of real estate fraud. We are being cited as the source, and this is coming from BaFin, regulatory agency in Germany, and the Bundesbank, and Interpol is starting to trace that link back from Germany over to the United States, and we're being cited as the source for the gold manipulation and the fraud in the gold market. We're being cited as a source for global price inflation. We're being cited as a source for behind every single war aggression, and we're being cited as the source for every single political upheaval that's occurring in the world today. It's all being traced back to us, and the world is sick of it, and frankly, so am I. Ukraine, folks, is the tipping point. Ukraine is where the dollar goes to die. And like I said before, this idiotic maneuverings, this desperate people doing stupid things. Look at France. France wants more sanctions on Russia. Meanwhile, France, a crazy country led by a moronic socialist who can't even run a lemonade stand. France, a country that is dependent on 25% of its energy needs on the Russians. Germany has 40% of its energy needs that are energy dependent on the Russians for 40% of the energy. Italy is 30% dependent on the Russians. And folks, this is the thing. Pivot East is accelerating. And as vast, as I'm speaking to you, vast sums of cash is being drained from New York and London. And as well as major amounts, like I said before, 1,000 metric tons of gold being drained from London. And Russian companies right now, folks, that have been doing business with U.S. banks, they're starting to, take all their money out. They're creating solvency issues for U.S. banks because they don't know what this administration is going to do next. Plus the fact that Moscow is starting to toughen up a little bit. And this is the thing. You want to talk about another issue here? You want to talk about what Germany thinks about this whole thing? Germany is very interesting. It's the largest economy in Europe. And the Germans are kind of PO'd. You know why they're PO'd? Here's why they're really PO'd, pissed off. The U.S. went ahead and stole 33 tons of Ukrainian gold immediately. And I want you folks to realize this. You can see a pattern. We go into Libya, we overthrow the government, we take the gold. We try to go into Syria, we try to overthrow the government, we're trying to get the gold, it didn't happen. We go into Ukraine, we take over the government, we overthrow it, and still puppet, we take the gold. Do you see, wherever we go after the gold. But the banks just tell you gold is worthless. You see, when the Ukrainians had 33 tons of gold stolen at 2 a.m., loaded onto a military aircraft, driven by unmarked vans with armed thugs, loaded onto a military transport plane and flown across with the blessings and clearances of the Ukrainian acting prime minister. Keyword on acting. It was flown to the New York Fed. The Germans went ballistic. They said to the U.S., and my sources have said, that the Germans were absolutely infuriated that they could not get back the 300 metric tons they left at the New York Fed. That they were only able to get back 5 metric tons, and the U.S. said, oh, we can't deliver it to you because we have logistic issues. And the Germans said, well, you seem to have no logistic issues stealing 33 tons of Ukrainian gold. There seems to be in one night, there seems to be no logistic issues there. Where do you think the Germans are going to cozy up to after this slap in their face? Do not think for a second that any of the actions by our country has gone unnoticed by the Germans. It's amazing, folks. These banksters and the leaders here have no shame. And wherever the U.S. goes, folks, it's the gold that they're after every single time. Why? Because right now, like I said earlier, we are in a hard rush for hard assets. And I'm telling you, when this pillaging is done in the Ukraine and it subverts back into a wasteland, the world will see what happens with countries that backs the U.S. that go along with the bankster programs, and they will have nothing to do with it. At that point, it's going to be too late. And right now, you have the window of opportunity open and some options open that's going to allow you to get out of the situation you're in. Folks, now is the time. You can't be in paper. I mean, I don't know how some people sleep at night. They have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in a checking account. I mean, you're kidding me. It's insane. How do you sleep at night? People ask me all the time, well, how do you sleep well at night knowing all this? Simple. I don't have nothing in the market. It's that simple. I'm 90% in metals. I'm not ashamed to admit it. That's what people have to start thinking. They need to start realigning and understanding what's really going on, the bigger picture. You're not myopic. No man is an island. Do not look at the forest. Do not look at the tree and miss the whole entire forest. You've got to see what's happening around you. Steve.
Well, I think what you're saying, V, I want to read something by Ugo Bardi, and I just posted it. I don't know if you've read it, ladies and gentlemen, but it's called Peak Gold, How the Romans Lost Their Empire. And this was written before V went on the air. He hasn't even read this yet, but I want to read something because what he just said is so spelled out in the rise and fall of Rome. And if you've ever seen any of the gold Roman coins, they're very, very neat. I used to basically sell a lot of the gold and silver Greek and Roman coins. I got out of it just simply because some really wealthy people started buying up everything. They packaged it and sold it kind of as a security, and then the bottom fell out. I'm talking like 20 years ago. But let me read this to you. This is by Ugo Bardi, and you want to read this, ladies and gentlemen? The most important thing you will ever read on gold and how the Romans lost their empire. I'm going to quote this. Eventually, everything that humans do is based on some form of belief or what has value in this world. The Romans saw gold and silver as stores of value. For us, there is a belief that bits generated inside computers are stores of value. But we may be sorely disappointed. Not that there will ever be a peak bits as long as there are computers around, but surely a major financial collapse would not just impoverish us, but most of all, it would disrupt our capability of controlling the energy resources we need so desperately. Ladies and gentlemen, why V said Ukraine is where the dollar goes to die? It's all about energy. Now listen to this. So when the oil pundits line up oil reserves, if each barrel were a soldier ready for battle, they tactically assume that these reserves are available for use of the global empire. That's not necessarily true. It depends on the degree of control that the empire will be able to exert on producers. That depends on a financial system, which may well turn out to be the weak link of the chain. Without control, power is useless. What are we seeing? We're seeing power in true power. I'm talking financial power. I'm talking specie, S-P-E-C-I-E, as relating to gold, silver, oil, platinum, and palladium, is absolutely residing now. It's absolutely come to nest in the Chinese and Russian hands. The Roman Empire, listen to this, the Roman Empire was lost when the financial system ceased to be able to control the military system. When the Romans lost their gold, everything was lost. In our case, it may well be that we will lose our ability to control the military system before we actually lose our ability to produce energy from fossil fuels. If the dollar loses its predominance in the world's financial system, then producers may be tempted to keep their oil for themselves. That's what V just said, that will keep their dollars for themselves. And ladies and gentlemen, at least not so enthusiastic anymore in allowing the empire to access it. That's us. How are we going to pay? What's happening today in the Ukraine may be a very first symptom of the impending loss of global control. And this article is so amazing because it starts out with the fact that a Roman aureus, A-U-R-E-U-S, minted by Emperor Severus in 193, the Common Era, at nearly 8 grams of gold. The aureus was truly an imperial coin, the embodiment of Rome's wealth and power. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are absolutely seeing, and the article talks about when Rome experienced peak gold. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see the fulfillment of the web bots in this. I'm only talking about their specific pronunciations or enunciations, announcements concerning the price of gold and silver. Because once it breaks, and V and I know from our independent, not known to each other's sources, that's important that you understand that, independent of each other, that when it breaks, there'll come a time where people will panic to get what they can get. But there will also come a time, and I'm talking days after the panic begins, where there will be no one willing to trade your gold or silver. And someone says, well, they're just going to come take it away. That's why you have to be creative. It's one thing to be creative, it's another thing, you must have the creativity to both acquire it and get what you can. Now, for those of you that are, and I'll let V talk about this program that he has for helping to generate wealth, but one of the best ways that I know is that as times get tougher, people are going to be forced to sell everything from sterling silver. They're going to be forced to sell all sorts of things. What would be good for all of you to do that have computers is start to see what has value. Go to some of these pawn shops, by the way, not pawn shops, but garage sales or estate sales, and start doing your homework. Look up furniture on eBay and go to the highest price first, because you can't believe what a crummy old chair from the 1700s is worth. And when I say a crummy old chair, I'm not a furniture collector. But one of the things I'm trying to tell you is avail yourself of the opportunity now. Learn what has value. And the problem with most Americans, they don't have street smarts when it comes to value. My definition of street smarts is knowing how to trade A for B to get C, knowing what the market will bear. A real simple way for a sportsman, if it's a buck a round for a 308 round right now, or a $1.50 for federal 168 grain match boat tail, then what's it worth in a panic situation? That happens to be a specific round. What is it worth, ladies and gentlemen, for a course of a Z-Pack, erythromycin? You know, there's so many things you can start to think of, but to generate cash, there are absolutely treasures given away, and I'm talking about given away.
Steve, did we lose Steve? V, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. And I'm looking here, and it appears that Steve is still on. I just can't. His audio just dipped out. Well, I'll tell you what. Go ahead, V. Pick it up from there. Steve is still on with us, but something happened to his audio. I'm not sure exactly what. Just go ahead and continue. You guys were on a roll here. Just finish Steve's thought, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. You know, the whole thing what Steve's saying is, you know, when you really break down what you spend, you really break down what you spend on cable or internet, or you spend on the data plans for your smartphone, or going out to see a movie or going out to eat dinner. There, when you break down your expenses, there's always going to be some cash left over. And if you take the cash left over and you're able to save it, you're able to purchase real hard assets. And I'm telling you, the cheapest thing you can get yourself involved with to really protect your wealth is silver. You can get 1 ounce silver coins, or you can get the chunk silver, also known as bank silver, and that's the pre-1964 U.S. coins, which have great strategic value, by the way, because when you're carrying that around, it looks like you got something from Grandma's mason jar. But here you have pre-1964 silver coins that are 90% silver. They're very cheap to get into. These are just some of the little ways, folks, that you can do to serve, to basically preserve your wealth. Because that's what this whole thing is about. You have to be prepared for the transitions. He who has the hard asset wins, okay? And it doesn't mean that you're excluded, okay? But the most important thing above all of this is having faith. And having faith in Jesus Christ is the most important thing in this whole equilibrium. And I've said it some time ago that Jesus is the ultimate prep. And unless you have him, you don't have anything at all. That's the key here, folks. We serve a God who is a miracle-working God. We serve a God who can bring water out of a rock. We serve a God who can provide manna from heaven and take care of your every single need. So pray. If you're, that's the most important prep. If you're in a bind financially, pray about it. See what God does. See what doors open up, and see how he is able to position you and put the right people in your life that can help you, or even miraculously and supernaturally provide for you. I mean, how often have I heard from speaking to missionaries how their needs were miraculously met. Food found directly underneath a chair where a gentleman was sitting when he was praying for food because he hasn't eaten all day. And there is a miraculously prepared food appearing right underneath his chair. I mean, this is the type of thing we're talking about. In spite of all the talk about prepping and financial planning and all these things, do not for 1 second forget who it is and whom you serve, because we serve a God that spoke and the universe leapt into existence. We serve a God who is a miracle-working God, and when he said that he gives you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all manner of the enemy, folks, that's not some idle word he's saying. That's real power, real authority, and it's in that authority you need to trust, because I, for 1 second, do not think that when the Bible says that in the last days the enemy, the devil, will come upon the earth with great power, that the church is going to go out singing, hold the fort. No. I think the greatest times are ahead for a Christian, and we need to understand who we are in him. We need to live a life of faith. We need to not operate in fear, but in faith. We need to have that bulldog determination where we can look the enemy in the eye and say, bring it on, devil. That's the type of attitude that we need to start developing now. We don't need to fear anything that comes our way. What we need to do is prepare for the things that God will bring. We need to prepare for the times that are at hand, but at the same time, for those who cannot prepare, understand, believe totally and entirely that you serve an awe-inspiring God. You serve a miracle-working God. You serve a God of power, and that you serve a God who cares about you. And his word says, cast all your cares upon me, for I care for you. And that, folks, is the end of the day. That's the blessed hope. That's the blessed hope, because unless you have Christ, you have nothing. Jesus Christ is in the center of my prep. That's the most important thing, folks. Jesus Christ is the center of my financial plan and my financial outlook. That's the crux of the message, folks. And unless you have him, you have nothing. You have nothing. Operate in faith. Don't worry about the fear. Pray to the Lord. Walk in the supernatural. Walk in the power. Walk in the authority that he's given you. We don't need to worry about the devil and all his antics. The devil's a punk. He is a punk. And the elites that serve him, I've never seen
more zealot group of people that love playing for the losing team. That's who these elites are. They're a bunch of has-beens. They're a bunch of losers on a losing team. We've won this thing, folks, before this whole thing even starts, and that's what people need to understand. Doug, is Steve back on?
Well, let me check. Steve, are you there? I've got you as a green light. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can indeed,
okay.
Steve. I'm glad you're back.
Well, I don't know what happened, but hey, it's just the course of typical behavior. I want to echo what V said. There's a promise that is so pertinent to all of us. Not only casting all our cares upon Him, Jesus, because He cares for us. The promise is, I have been young and now I'm old. David, King David speaking. But I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. And let me tell you this, Doug, and V will herald this. When we start to appropriate by faith, the faith that overcomes the world, not comes under the world, it will be because of God's miraculous provision, His protection, and all that He has promised His word. That's where the hatred will come from, because faith will always be persecuted by unbelief. The Cains will always try and destroy Abel, but the promise of God will be to those. I like what David said. One time, Pastor Langford, not King David, but David Langford said that somebody was praying. He said, Lord, why do you love David Langford more than me? And the Lord answered his prayer and said, it's not that I love you more than David, it's that David loves me more than you. Somebody once said to me, Doug, and this is a great statement, you can be as close or as far away from Jesus as you want to be. When I grew up in the Jesus movement, saved in 1972, the definition of fanatic in those days was anybody who loved Jesus more than you do. And we don't have to tell the person's name, but one of the people that I've tried to help by promoting his newsletter and website, basically because he lives like hell, he acts like hell, and he certainly has no fear of God. He cannot accept any of the stuff I say, even though I've been right because of my Christian belief. Now, I'll tell you this. I have been offered a whole lot of money, and I'm only saying this to the glory of God. And it's not about money. It's about hearing the well done, thou good and faithful servant. I've been taunted. It goes daily. But when people step up to the pump that can write you checks with more zeros than most people can even read the amount and say, just come over to our side. Just tell the people to yield. Just tell them to do this. We'll tell you what to say. You've got a following. I said, well, I got news for you. That may do good for you, but it does nothing for me in eternity, and it's not what I'm about. And then they try the other tactic, and they say, look at all the emails you get. We read your emotional frustration with the people you're trying to help. And the people you're trying to help mock you, and they scorn and they ridicule. I say not all of them do. So while they're playing psych games with my head, I want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, what we're giving you is definable, actionable intelligence. And when I'm saying intelligence, we can't help your intelligence, but we can give you intel to hopefully give you information, and we can try and give you collective years of wisdom. I used to trade big-time numbers in the silver and gold market. I don't so much anymore, but big-time, when you got multi-million-dollar positions on, and I'm my own trader. I don't trade for other people, or mostly, only very, very close friends. I'm not a licensed option or stockbroker or anything else. I'm a legal dealer. But the point I'm trying to make is that I always hear the criticism, well, you can't eat your gold, you can't eat your silver. Yet why is it that same criticism doesn't carry through when people invest everything in a lie perpetrated by man, in paper and financial instruments, obviously authored in hell? Why is it that you trust everything that you have worked for all your life to entities that hold you in contempt? And you've heard V talk about the way they talk about the average investor, that the stockbroker calls on the phone and wants to push this, that, or the other stock, and they hold you in total contempt. Here's the deal. The proverb says, a fool and his money are soon parted. But what people don't understand is that if you can't touch it, you don't own it. And what's happening now is the Chinese and Russians are setting into motion physical barriers to fraud, because they want to start out with a new platform. And 70%, and isn't it funny, V, that basically they're already acting, both China and Russia, like the U.S. doesn't exist. Do you think that's because they know we're not going to in any way, shape, or form once they initiate their trigger events? And again, it's that close, Doug. It's that close. Go ahead, V.
You hit the nail on the head, Steve. You hit the nail on the head. They act as if we don't exist. You're absolutely 100,000% correct. I just wanted to say that.
You know what?
Well, again, a bunch of broke. Go ahead, Doug. I'm sorry.
Well, Steve. I mean, in V too. I think the consensus is this, and I think a lot of people believe, or at the end of the day, that they're going to believe incorrectly that everything that happens with respect to the killing of the U.S. dollar is a result of some cosmic accident, and it's not. This has been in the works for a long time. Isn't that correct, Steve?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's plotted, it's planned, it's scripted. I mean, I just read to you one of the emails from, forgive me, not one of the emails, but one of the prophecies from Dmitry Duduman that was given a whole long time ago. And what's critical, and by the way, V, I guess somebody just sent me an email claiming that, according to Mark 11, the Senate with Reid and McConnell have voted to relinquish U.S. control of the IMF. Well, let me read between the lines. They didn't vote to relinquish it. They obviously saw the handwriting on the wall, and basically someone dictated to them their vote. So as V was talking about the U.S. losing control of the IMF, isn't it amazing that I guess at the same time V said it, this is what Rain, R-E-I-N, sent me. He said, please tell V that Congress voted in the IMF tonight. The vote was posted when you guys started talking. Isn't that amazing?
Wow. Folks, we are in the midst of it. Remember, I told you, April is going to be a big date. We're talking about a paradigm shift towards the end of April. And May, Russia signs the biggest gas deal in world history with the Chinese in May. It's over. It's over. It's done. That's it. I mean, they just relinquished the IMF control tonight. It's done. It's done. That means they're going to ramrod every single reform internally, globally, putting it into the reserve currency status. That's it. It's over.
It's important that people understand, too, that, again, Doug, this is what we're trying to say. Food first. If someone says, I've got $1,000, should I buy silver? My answer is no. Buy food, because the food is going to be, number one, harder and harder to acquire. Number two, more dangerous by its genetic alteration and stuff. And the people that mocked and scoffed and ridiculed those who bought the long-term storage food from 10 years ago, 13 years ago, 5 years ago, those people that bought that food to much ridicule, scorn, and even their mate, their husband or wife's, anger in some cases, you realize that some of the safest food on the planet, it was before a lot of the GMO manipulation. Here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen, and this is probably going to be, 5 minutes. I'll turn it over to V to close. But you are a casualty of the kingdom of lies. The kingdom of lies, when you turn on the radio in most cases, when you turn on the television, when you read the papers, newspapers, articles, what are you sold? You're sold some new product with some sexy thing, or in this case, Nabisco selling same-sex marriages as being wholesome. Whatever that has to do with the quality of their food, I don't know. I would think that will backfire against them. By the way, that's a real advertising campaign. When you look at the ancient history that I write about, now it becomes headlines every day. Do you think maybe the Lord is trying to warn his people? If God, in his mercy, in his love, in his salvation, in his compassion, in his intervention in our lives, says his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, I can't do anything about that except pray, believe the intercessors to pray, that your hearts will be open, the eyes of your understanding will be open, and that you'll start to grasp the serious nature of this. I believe that God will take the loaves and fishes of the people who are preparing and multiply them as needed. I believe that God will lead the people who are looking to Him to the places of refuge. I don't know where they are. How could I know where they are? If I knew where they are, the enemy would know where they are, and just simply because, they're not visible yet. And if God needs to put His canopies and domes around us, listen, you see the difference between the house that's still standing and the houses that are wiped out to the right and left and to the east and west of people. You've probably seen some of those ones in fires. It's amazing. I've heard the testimonies of some of the people that own the houses. They were praying people. Anoint your apartments, anoint your homes. Anointing means take oil. Just as the children of Israel had to apply the blood of the lamb using the hyssop to their doorposts and lintels, do it. It's an act of faith. And then trust God. I still stand on this basic premise. I will do everything I know to do, believing God to do the impossible and knowing that I can't do the impossible, therefore I don't have to try. So the simplest step of faith can be rewarded with the greatest bounty of harvest. How does it apply in the food realm? Simple. Yes, for $5. Maybe you find a $10 bill, $20 bill. Say, Lord, I'm going to take this and I'm going to buy $20 of food. And I believe, Lord, that you'll multiply this, because here's what it's all about. It's not about me having calories and everybody else not having calories. It's about being able to feed the people that God wants me to feed. And someone says, well, what happens to your storage food if somebody kills you before you get to eat it? These are the kind of questions I get. Real simple. Then somebody else will get the fruit of my planning. And see, that's what we're trying to talk about tonight, ladies and gentlemen. When V tells you about the shortage of supply in gold and talks to you about the shortage in supply of silver, I'm fortunate and I can say this honestly, on a daily basis, I can pretty well get a handle. Do I know to the last ounce? No. But I'm within 1 or 2% of knowing how much total silver, gold, platinum, and palladium. And by the way, Tyler Durden, just at Zero Hedge, said, hey, everybody's looking at palladium. Palladium is the best play in the block because the Russians control it. And last time the West and Russia got into a contest to see whose bladder was fuller. How's that for tactful? The thing is that palladium jumped up dramatically into the $1,000, $1,100 range. So the point is that having something beats having nothing. And I cannot handle, and I say I won't do it, and sure enough, I'll get another one. The basis of 401ks, IRAs, KEOs, and 401ks isn't to put them into gold or silver and leave the gold and silver with somebody else. The purpose is to sell them, get your money, get your product, and have it in hand. And it's fascinating to me, V. I still run up against that day after day, week after week. The point is that having it in someone else's control. And here's what it boils down to. I think I've said this before, Doug, but it needs to be reiterated. The reason most people don't take control of their finances is out of fear. Would you say that's true, V? They don't want to be responsible. And I find it after, 30-some plus years in the metals business, the number one thing is I have people that will openly, almost I'd call it gallows humor, laugh at losing $400,000 or $500,000 in the stock market. I'll ask them how old they are. They'll say 62. I said, do you really think you can make back your $400,000 or $500,000 that you lost over those 30 years of work? You see, this is where the word value, because we've become a valueless nation, because our roots do not go down into what I would call biblical and righteous morality. When the press of the world is claiming, and go on Drudge right now and see the headlines, I'm not making it up, but when they're claiming that this is the most hostile administration towards Christians, and Vladimir Putin is on record as saying he's going to defend the Western Christian faith, ladies and gentlemen, what's wrong with that picture? I think personally you'll see either Russians or Chinese float the complete dossier on the president and his lead cabinet members at about the same time they sink the dollar. Why will they do that? Simply to show Americans that you who thought you had the moral high ground, because we've had a snooty American high ground mentality. When you live in the world of intelligence agencies, espionage, spy, overlapping coverage of everything that goes on. When this nation is finally brought to its destruction, it will be because everything in the courts of heaven, all evidence against us, will be laid out. And you know who the prosecuting attorneys will be? It will be the countries who will rise up to point their fingers at us, and because they are at least standing for just weights and measures, we're damned in this country because of unjust weights and measures. Bobby Brown has a great, Brother Bobby has a great story, and it's called Just Measures. And I love that statement because God is just. And let me share this. It's a mythological idea to to state that justice is blind. Justice is not blind. The eyes of the Lord go throughout the whole earth, looking, searching, seeking after those whose hearts are perfect towards him. 2 Chronicles 16:9. I just don't spout scripture, but I want you to know, will God's eyes stop on you? The minute you begin to praise him, God's eyes are upon you. The minute you begin to thank him, God's ears are upon you. The minute you begin to say help in true surrender and true adoration, God's moving on your behalf, but he will not violate your free will. So, ladies and gentlemen, here it is in a nutshell. As we go off the air tonight in the next few minutes, I'm turning it right over to V to close it out. You've got a choice to make. You're going to take control of your money. If you don't control your money, someone else will. You can contact me, send me an email, steve777@stevequayle.com, and we will help you and try and get you out of harm's way to the best of our ability. Go ahead, V. I'm done, Doug. God bless you, Doug. Enjoy the wonderful time down there. May the Lord grant you just peace and rest and refreshing. V, bless you, my brother. Finish it out.
Thank you, Steve. Go ahead, V.
For anybody that needs help out there, you have a portfolio, you're a high net worth individual, or you got north of $100,000 or more. You don't know what the heck to do with it. You need proper investing advice. Contact me, Guerrilla Economist, one word. That's GUERRILLA, economist@gmail.com. Also, those who need to have their credit fixed. I mean, you're a good person, you've had some bad things happen to you. Maybe it's a bankruptcy, maybe it's student loans, maybe it's credit card debt that all of a sudden you thought you could stay ahead of, but you can't. Contact me as well, GuerrillaEconomist@gmail.com. My friend and colleague, Mr. Sean Martin, who is a Wall Street insider and legend, would go ahead and he'll fix up your credit and completely set the record clean, folks. I'm talking about bankruptcies removed, delinquent marks removed, inquiries, hard inquiries gone, cleaned up, ready to go, brand new life. And he can do that for you. That comes with a money-back guarantee. The other opportunity that I have for people, I mean, if you're struggling, you need an additional stream of income, you're sick of working for somebody else, you want to start your own business, I've partnered with an energy company in the commodities business. We're going to be dealing with energy. We are moving from a gunboat diplomacy, as I said earlier, into an energy diplomacy. Energy will always be there, folks. It is the language. It is the currency of international trade and diplomacy. If you want to be a part of this startup, it doesn't cost you anything. It'll actually save you money on what you're doing currently in terms of your current service. It's a great opportunity for you to get involved. Again, it has zero risk, zero cost. It's a great opportunity. Contact me, GuerrillaEconomist@gmail.com. Also, folks, join the website, roguemoney.net. It's only $2.99 a month. For a $10 initial payment, it's $2.99 a month, and you're going to get front row seats. You're going to get insider information every day. I have people who have been in the financial field for decades, insiders, Wall Street, derivative traders, sending me emails saying, "Hey man, your stuff, I can't believe I'm only paying $2.99 a month for this type of information." People have said this is worth. People were shocked. They thought I should be charging them $10,000 for this type of information, but it's $2.99 a month, folks, for the type of intel you're going to be getting. I write a lot of exclusive articles there. So, again, contact me for the business opportunity. Contact me to get your credit fixed. Contact me for consultations. And join the website, roguemoney.net. Doug.
V, I want to thank you very much. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, that's V, the guerrilla economist, good friend of the show, terrific person, brother in Christ, and definitely a warrior for truth. V, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that, my friend.
Thank you, Doug. Have a blessed day, my friend.
All right, brother.
Do it again.
Thank you so much. All righty. Folks, that'll do it for us tonight on this, the 24th day of March, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann, down in Orlando, Florida, for the Prophecy in the News Conference, which will be starting on Friday. Those registered for the conference, we hope to see you. Both John and I hope to see you there. And for tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we're going to be handling both rebroadcast and some interviews that we will do. So it's going to be a mix. Just check with our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com. In the meanwhile, stay safe, and until next time, God bless.